Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, Silent Stalker by the Lake, Unseen Presence in the Woods. I had been looking forward to this trip for months. I arrived early afternoon, carrying my pack as the path narrowed and the trees thickened around me. The hike had taken longer than I thought, rough terrain and a couple of wrong turns, but eventually I saw the lake through the trees, its surface calm and clear, reflecting the sky like a mirror. I picked a spot on a small clearing near the water's edge, flat ground, some dry leaves, and pine needles to cushion my sleeping bag. I set up my tent, rolled out my sleeping pad, and arranged my gear neatly inside. The first day passed uneventfully. I fished a little, read a paperback I'd brought, and ate a simple dinner of canned beans and crackers. The sun sank low, painting the sky in pink and orange, and as darkness fell, I built a small fire. The crackling flames were comforting, and I fell asleep to their light and the distant calls of night birds. But the next morning, things started to feel off. I woke early to the sound of twigs snapping. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or raccoon, but the noise was too deliberate, too close. I grabbed my flashlight and peered outside the tent. The forest was still shadowed with dawn colors, and the lake lay quiet. No movement, no broken branches. I shook it off as my imagination playing tricks. Later that day, I noticed footprints. At first, I thought they might be animal tracks, bears or coyotes, but they were unmistakably human. They circled the clearing, some near the lake's edge, others close to my tent. Fresh, pressed into the soft earth, and definitely not mine. I had been alone since I arrived. No one else had camped here recently. The nearest ranger station was miles away, and no trails led to this spot except the one I'd taken. That's when the unease set in. I checked my supplies, making sure everything was accounted for. Food, water, matches, my small camping stove, all there. But as the day wore on, I started noticing little things missing. A granola bar from my pack, a bottle of water that should have been full but was suddenly less than half. At first, I convinced myself maybe I'd been careless, or that animals somehow got into my bag. But the tent was zipped tight, and I hung food from a tree, as recommended in all the guides. That night, I slept with one eye open, clutching my flashlight. The woods around me seemed too silent, the usual night noises stilled as if in anticipation. Around midnight, I heard it again, twigs snapping, footsteps crunching on dry leaves. Closer this time, just outside my tent. I shone the flashlight into the dark, the beam cutting through the inky blackness, and caught a glimpse of a figure moving between the trees. I froze. The figure paused, as if aware of my gaze, then disappeared. My heart pounded. I knew then I wasn't alone. The next morning, I packed my things quickly and left the tent open, hoping to catch whoever was out there snooping around. I sat by the lake, pretending to fish, but watching the tree line carefully. A few hours passed with nothing. Then, I noticed a scrap of fabric caught on a branch near the trail, a piece of a shirt, faded and stained. It wasn't mine. That same afternoon, my water bottle vanished. I was convinced now someone had been moving through my camp while I slept, or when I was distracted. But who? Why? And how had they gotten so close without me noticing? I decided not to make any noise and to stay alert. I knew I had to get out before it was too late, but the nearest road was miles away, and night was coming again. That evening, as I prepared my meager dinner, I heard the footsteps again, this time accompanied by a low, guttural whisper carried by the wind. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear, threatening, mocking. Whoever was out there was close, and watching. I wanted to call for help, but I had no signal. I was trapped in a wilderness where the only danger wasn't bears or wild animals. It was someone like me, someone who had been lurking in the shadows for days, waiting and watching. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew I had to be ready. I checked my knife, tightened the straps on my backpack, and tried to make myself as small and inconspicuous as possible. Somewhere out there, someone was stalking me, and I had no idea if they were planning to scare me off or worse. The forest had turned from a place of peace into a trap, and every rustle of leaves sounded like a warning. I wasn't just alone anymore. I was being hunted. My breath came in shallow bursts as I pressed myself against the rough bark of an ancient oak, its twisted limbs reaching out like silent sentinels. The fading light filtered through the canopy, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Every snap of a twig or distant cry made my heart leap. Was it them, or just the forest playing tricks on me? I tightened my grip on the knife, its cold handle grounding me amid the growing tension. My mind raced, sifting through every lesson I'd learned, every survival tactic I'd ever heard. I needed a plan, and fast. Staying still wasn't an option. I had to move, to find higher ground or a clearing where I could see whoever was out there before they saw me. The underbrush shifted ahead. I froze. A low, guttural sound rumbled through the air, neither animal nor human, but something in between. The hunt was closing in. I swallowed the rising fear and stepped forward, into the unknown, ready to face whatever waited in the darkness. Dark, the dense canopy above blocking the weak morning light. I zipped open the tent and stepped out, the cool air brushing past my face. The forest floor was littered with fallen leaves and broken twigs, but no obvious footprints or clues. I scanned the area, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Nothing moved. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. I tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe I was just tired, jumpy from being alone. I had planned this trip for months, had been looking forward to some solitude, and now I was already on edge. I decided to keep busy. I packed away my tent and gear, intending to spend the day hiking a little further along the lake's perimeter. As I gathered my stuff, I noticed something odd. My small pack of trail mix, which I was sure I had left untouched in my tent last night, was missing. I searched the inside thoroughly, among my clothes, sleeping bag, pockets, nothing. I checked the surrounding ground just outside the tent, but there was no sign of it. I could have sworn I'd put it on the small tarp beneath my bag before sleeping. Shrugging, I told myself maybe I'd misplaced it earlier and forgotten, or an animal had taken it. But the thought unsettled me more than I expected. I strapped on the rest of my gear, double-checked my water bottle and fishing kit, then set off, trying to focus on the trail rather than the missing snack. The morning hike was quiet. The path was narrow, winding under towering pines, the scent of pine resin and damp earth thick in the air. I watched for birds and squirrels, sometimes catching glimpses of small animals scurrying through the underbrush. When the path opened to a rock-strewn shore on the lake's far side, I paused to rest and fish. The water was clear, and I spotted a few small fish darting just beneath the surface. I cast my line carefully and waited, enjoying the peacefulness. But when I reeled in, I found my hook empty. After a few more tries, still no luck. Something didn't feel right. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled again. I packed up and began to walk back, taking care to watch the trees and bushes more closely. That's when I saw it, faint tracks in the dirt, barely visible, but definitely human. They were shallow, like someone tried to avoid leaving marks, but the impressions were there. The size matched a man's boot, maybe a size 10 or 11. And they were fresh. I froze, heart pounding. I scanned the woods, looking for movement, but all was still. I followed the tracks slowly, trying not to make noise, but they didn't lead away from the campsite as I'd hoped. Instead, they circled back toward my tent. I quickened my pace, trying to keep calm. When I reached the clearing, my stomach sank. The tarp I'd laid under my tent was crumpled and partially pulled away. My tent's flap was slightly unzipped, though I was sure I'd closed it tightly. Inside, my fishing knife was missing. A chill ran through me. This wasn't just an animal taking food. Someone had been here, someone watching me. I scanned the edge of the trees, trying to peer through the dense undergrowth. Nothing moved, but I felt eyes on me. The silence was oppressive. I packed quickly, deciding to shorten my trip and leave before nightfall. I ate a quick lunch, double-checking my gear. I inventoried everything carefully. My knife, essential for survival, was gone. My trail mix was gone. And now, I noticed my small water bottle had less water than I remembered filling it with an hour earlier. I crouched by the edge of the lake, running cold fingers through the water. Was someone sneaking around, taking my supplies? Was I being watched the whole time, helpless in this remote place? I thought about calling for help, but there was no cell service out here. The nearest ranger station was miles away. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, I kept my senses sharp, walking the perimeter of the lake with my eyes glued to the underbrush. At one point, I spotted a crude shelter made of branches and leaves, partially hidden behind a clump of bushes. It looked like someone had been living here, or at least spent time hiding. Nearby, I found discarded food wrappers, old, but recent enough to be disturbing. I backed away slowly, knowing I couldn't stay here. The forest, once inviting and peaceful, had become an unpredictable trap. Returning to my camp, I noticed more subtle changes. My backpack was shifted slightly from where I'd left it, and a small tuft of hair, dark, coarse, was caught on a nearby branch. The realization hit me hard. Whoever had been here was watching me closely, possibly living near me, waiting. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a hunter, or someone homeless living off the forest. But the theft of my supplies, the signs of surveillance? That felt more calculated, more threatening. I considered packing everything and hiking out immediately, but the terrain was rough, and I wasn't sure I could make it safely before nightfall. Instead, I decided to make some noise, to deter whoever was nearby. I gathered stones and threw them into the lake, shouted out loud, but the forest swallowed my voice. Later, as I prepared to settle in again, I heard something crack behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but saw only shadows shifting among the trees. I grabbed a sturdy branch from the ground and held it ready, every muscle tense. For hours, I sat by the flickering firelight, listening to the forest sounds, snaps, rustles, distant calls, but always feeling watched. Sleep was impossible. Every time my eyes closed, I imagined someone creeping closer in the darkness. When dawn finally broke, I packed my gear with trembling hands. I couldn't stay. The forest wasn't the enemy here, the person, whoever they were, lurking out there was. As I hiked back toward the trailhead, I kept glancing over my shoulder, searching the tree line for signs of movement. The wilderness had always been my refuge, but this time it had turned sinister. And I hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. The morning after the noises started, I tried to shake off the unease. After breakfast, I decided to do a quick perimeter check. I thought maybe I could find a track or any hint of what had been wandering near my tent. The ground was dry, scattered with pine needles and a few fallen leaves, but nothing obvious caught my eye. Still, the feeling that something wasn't right hung heavily in the air. I returned to camp and sat on a rock by the water's edge, skimming stones and watching the ripples spread. The lake was peaceful, too peaceful. The kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of every sound. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to spot a figure or hear more footsteps breaking the silence. Nothing. Around midday, I went back to the tent to check on my supplies. I had arranged everything neatly the night before, canned food stacked in a corner, my water bottle filled to the brim, fishing tackle in a small bag tied to a tree branch. But something was off. My pack, which I'd left zipped tight, was slightly ajar. At first, I thought I'd forgotten to close it properly, but then I noticed the empty spot where my small knife used to be. It was a basic little thing with a serrated edge, nothing fancy, but I liked having it for emergencies. That unsettled me more than I expected. Someone or something had been here, close enough to rummage through my stuff. I double-checked everything. Some of my canned food was missing, a couple of energy bars gone, and the water bottle was half empty despite me only taking a few sips that morning. My stomach tightened. This wasn't random animal activity, this was deliberate. I started scanning the trees, looking for anything out of place. Then I saw marks on the bark of a nearby pine, fresh and rough, as if someone had been scratching or carving something recently. The cuts weren't deep enough to be a message, but they were deliberate. Not the work of a bear or a deer. My heart pounded. If someone had been here, watching me for days as I started to realize, then this wasn't just a prank or a chance encounter. They were close, they had access to my supplies, and they knew I was alone. I debated packing up and leaving immediately, but the idea of hiking back under this kind of pressure scared me. The forest was thick and confusing, and I wasn't sure I could retrace my steps in a hurry without risking injury. Instead, I pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course. That was part of why I'd chosen this spot, to get away from everything. Now, that isolation felt like a trap. The afternoon passed in a blur of tension. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. When I needed water, I filled my bottle directly from the lake, careful to keep my eyes on the tree line. I fished for a while, but my hands trembled, making the line not entangle. My appetite vanished. As sunset neared, I noticed something else, footprints. Faint but unmistakable, pressed into the soft earth near the shore. They were human, size and shape suggesting a man's boots. They circled around the camp, sometimes close, sometimes further away, as if whoever left them had been pacing or lurking. I wanted to call out, challenge whoever was out there, but something held me back. Panic made my throat dry, and my voice felt small, swallowed by the trees. Night came too quickly. I walked around the fire several times, checking my perimeter by its light. Every snap and crack from the woods sent a jolt through me. I kept my knife close, even though it was missing, so I grabbed a sturdy stick, sharpening one end on a rock until it felt like a crude spear. At some point, I heard it, a whisper carried on the wind, too faint to make out, but definitely a human voice. It didn't sound friendly. I froze, straining to hear more, but only the forest responded. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, I stayed awake most of the night, sitting by the fire with my makeshift spear in hand. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that danced like silent figures among the trees. I told myself to stay calm, to be rational. People didn't usually follow strangers into the woods just to threaten them. But the evidence was there, undeniable. My supplies missing. The marks on the trees. The footsteps. The whispers. Someone was out there, and they weren't just curious. By dawn, exhaustion was catching up with me, but I couldn't let myself fall asleep. Not yet. I thought back to everything I'd brought and what I would do if I had to defend myself or run. My phone was useless. My only real weapons were that stick and whatever courage I could muster. I planned to pack light at first light and move to a new spot, deeper into the forest but closer to the main trail I'd used. Maybe I could get cell service there. Maybe I could find other campers or hikers. But as the first rays of sun broke through the canopy, I noticed something else. My tent zipper was open again. Not fully, just enough to slip a hand inside. Whoever had been here had returned sometime during the night. And they'd been close enough to feel confident, comfortable, unafraid. I couldn't stay here. I stuffed my gear into my pack quickly, my hands shaking. Every sound made me jump, every shadow seemed like an approaching figure. The forest, so beautiful and serene by day one, had turned into a maze of threats. As I stepped off the clearing, I glanced back once more at the still smoldering fire pit. I told myself to keep calm, to stay alert. The real danger wasn't the wilderness. It was the person or people still out there, watching, waiting. And as I moved away from the lake, the weight of that realization settled over me heavier than my pack ever could. The morning after I found the footprints, I woke with a tight knot in my stomach. I packed up the tent quickly, eager to get out of the clearing, but I couldn't just abandon the spot. It was my only shelter, my only base in this endless forest. Instead, I decided to make a plan. I'd keep a better watch, set some traps around the perimeter, and be ready if whoever was out there showed up again. Breakfast was sparse, my last can of beans and a few crackers. When I opened my pack to grab the can opener, my heart skipped. The small bottle of water I'd set carefully at the bottom of my bag was gone. At first, I thought I'd misplaced it. I rummaged through every pocket, every corner. No luck. Someone had taken it. Panic wasn't exactly the right word, but it was close. The idea of someone creeping around my camp, taking my supplies, was far worse than any fear of animals or the cold. I prepared for the wilderness, but not for human predators. I scanned the area around the tent, looking for any sign of movement or fresh footprints. The ground was soft in some places where the pine needles had thinned. There were definite prints of boots, not sneakers, with a distinctive tread pattern I'd never seen before. They circled the camp like a predator stalking prey. No, this wasn't random. It was deliberate. I set about marking the perimeter by tying bright ribbons to branches at eye level. I wanted some way to tell if anyone crossed through while I was sleeping or distracted. I put down makeshift noise traps, empty cans tied to thin cords stretched between trees. If someone tried to sneak in, the clatter would alert me. By midday, the sun was high and hot. I tried to keep busy, fishing again, but every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made me whip my head around. I packed my pocket knife, sliding the sheath onto my belt. It was better than nothing, but I knew a knife was no match for a determined attacker. When I returned to camp, I noticed something else was missing, my small bag of trail mix. The empty spot on the picnic blanket was glaringly obvious. Whoever had been watching me wasn't just nearby, they were inside my camp, rifling through my things. I felt violated. Exposed. I'd come here to escape the world, to find solitude, and now I was being hunted. I tried calling for help, but the cell service was spotty at best. No bars. The nearest ranger station was miles away. I had to rely on myself. I decided it was time to move. Not far, just a couple 100 yards deeper into the forest, away from the clearing. Somewhere less obvious, more concealed. I broke down the tent, packed everything quickly, and headed into the trees. The underbrush was thicker here, branches scraping my arms and face as I pushed through. The forest floor was uneven, scattered with rocks and fallen branches. I tried to keep a mental map, noting landmarks, the twisted oak with the split trunk, the big moss-covered boulder shaped like a crouching animal. I found a small hollow beneath a cluster of evergreens. It was cramped, but it offered cover and the lake was still visible through the trees. I set up the tent again, trying to make it less conspicuous. No bright ribbons this time. No obvious noise traps. I ate the last of my trail mix, washing it down with sips from a small stream nearby. It wasn't ideal, but better than nothing. My supplies were dwindling fast, and the thought of another night with barely anything to eat or drink was grim. As evening fell, I built a small fire, careful to keep it low and contained. Flames cast dancing shadows in the trees, and I tried to convince myself the flickering light would keep me safe. But safety was an illusion now. Around midnight, I woke to a faint sound. A branch snapping, a soft shuffle in the distance. My heart pounded as I grabbed my flashlight and peered out of the tent flap. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the nearby trunks and bushes. Nothing moved. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, every nerve alert. I didn't want to close my eyes, afraid I'd missed a moment whoever it was came back. The next morning, I inspected the perimeter. Sure enough, fresh footprints crisscrossed near the tent. But there was more this time. Crudely carved into the bark of a nearby tree was a message. It was simple, just one word: leave. The letters were jagged, uneven, like whoever had made them had done so in a hurry, but the threat was clear. I packed my things again. I was no longer interested in staying. I started hiking back toward the lake, intending to follow the trail out of the forest. But as I walked, I noticed something chilling, a line of broken twigs and disturbed leaves that followed me, almost like a shadow. I stopped, dropped my pack, and scanned the area. No one visible. But the signs were undeniable. I wasn't alone. I moved faster, adrenaline pushing me through the thick underbrush and over roots. The sun was rising higher, and I hoped that daylight would make me less vulnerable. The forest was a maze, and I was running out of time. When I finally reached the lake's edge, the clearing was empty, but my old campsite was a wreck. The tent was slashed, poles broken and scattered. My gear was missing everything. I sank to the ground, exhaustion and fear washing over me. Someone had been here, had torn through my things, and they were still out there. I realized then that the wilderness wasn't my enemy. It was whoever had been stalking me, whoever had been watching from the shadows, waiting for me to weaken. And they were close. I gathered what I could: my knife, my lighter, a few scraps of food, and started following the trail out, hoping to find a ranger or another hiker. I kept looking over my shoulder, every noise setting my heart racing. I didn't know who they were, or what they wanted, but I knew one thing: if they caught me, I wouldn't get a second chance. The forest around me was no longer a place of peace. It was a trap. And I had to get out. The sun was just peeking over the treetops when I woke to the familiar but unsettling sound of branches cracking, slow, cautious, deliberate. I slipped out of my sleeping bag and peered out from the tent flap. The forest was still shrouded in mist, the lake a silver ribbon in the dim light. I scanned the edge of the clearing, half expecting to catch a glimpse of someone watching me, but saw nothing but swaying trees and scattered leaves. I tried to shake off the growing unease. I reminded myself I was miles from the nearest town. Who would be out here? But the missing supplies, the food, the firewood, those weren't mistakes or animals. Someone had been here, and they were still nearby. I decided to check the perimeter of the clearing. I grabbed my small pocket knife from the gear pile and stepped quietly into the morning chill. The ground was soft and damp beneath my boots, everything muted except for the occasional bird call. I circled the camp slowly, eyes straining for signs of recent activity. Near the far edge, partially hidden beneath a cluster of fallen pine needles, I spotted it, a half-buried footprint pressed into the soft earth. It was too large to be mine, and the pattern looked fresh. I crouched down and traced the edges with my finger. The mud was drying but still pliable. Someone had definitely been here in the last day. A cold wave of realization washed over me. I wasn't alone. And whoever had been coming and going had been careful not to be seen. I returned to the camp and checked the supply cache. The unopened canned beans were still there, but the packet of trail mix was gone, as was the small bottle of water I'd stashed beneath a rock by the tent. My last clean shirt was missing from the dry bag, and a couple of energy bars I'd placed near the firewood pile had vanished. I felt exposed, like I was a sitting duck, and the hunter was still out there, watching, waiting. I didn't know whether to be angry or terrified. I had no idea what this person wanted: food, shelter, or something worse. I went back into the tent and grabbed my phone, but of course there was no signal this far out. I thought about heading back along the trail, but the thought of walking into the woods alone, knowing someone was watching me, felt even more threatening. I needed a plan. I started gathering whatever I could use for defense. The pocket knife was small, but better than nothing. I took a sturdy stick from the firewood pile and sharpened one end against a rock until it was pointy. I wrapped some strips of fabric from my shirt around the handle for grip. Then I looked around for a way to signal if I got into trouble. I filled a metal cup with water from the lake and heated it over the fire until it steamed. Carrying it carefully, I went to the edge of the clearing and dropped in a handful of small stones, hoping the splashing might deter anyone lurking just beyond the tree line. It was a long shot, but I had to try something. I spent the rest of the morning double-checking my camp setup, making sure the tent stakes were secure, the fire was ready to relight at a moment's notice, and my gear was arranged so I could grab everything quickly. I moved my sleeping bag toward the center of the tent, away from the walls, just in case. At noon, I decided to try fishing again, though my appetite had vanished. I sat on a fallen log near the water's edge, casting the line and watching the ripples spread across the surface. The forest was eerily quiet around me. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just the occasional snap of a branch somewhere deeper in the woods. I scanned the tree line, nerves stretched tight. Part of me wanted to believe it was all in my head, but the evidence said otherwise. Someone had been following me, stealing my supplies, and watching my every move. As the afternoon wore on, I considered packing up and heading out, but the thought of hiking through the dense forest with an unknown person stalking me was paralyzing. I was effectively trapped. Just before dusk, I noticed a faint trail of footsteps in the soft soil near the water's edge, leading away from the camp. They were small and quick, like someone had been running. I followed them cautiously for a few meters before they disappeared into a tangle of underbrush. That's when I heard it, a low, deliberate crunch of leaves behind me. I spun around, gripping my makeshift spear tightly. The shadows between the trees shifted, and a figure stepped out, a man, gaunt, with a wild look in his eyes. His clothes were ragged, dirt-smudged, and he carried a crudely fashioned club in one hand. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He said nothing, just stared, mouth slightly open, as if trying to decide what I was. I took a step back, heart hammering. "I'm not looking for trouble," I said. "I just want to leave." He crouched down, scanning the ground near my feet, and picked up a small piece of my torn shirt that had snagged on a twig. He held it up, studying it. Then, without warning, he threw it into the lake. I blinked, confused. He motioned toward the deeper woods, then back at the campfire, as if warning me not to stay. I realized then he wasn't just watching me, he was territorial, protective of this place. "Look," I said slowly, "I'm not here to mess with you. I just want to camp and leave in the morning." He grunted, then nodded once, almost imperceptibly, before turning and disappearing into the shadows. I didn't move until the last echo of footsteps died away. When I got back to the tent, I locked the zipper and piled rocks around the entrance. Sleep was impossible, every sound outside amplified in the silence. By the time dawn came, I was exhausted but resolved. I packed everything I could carry, double-checked the trail behind me, and started hiking back the way I came, eyes peeled for any sign that I was being followed. I never saw the man again, but I knew he was out there, somewhere in the forest, watching. And I was lucky to have escaped with more than just my missing supplies. Story 2, Predicted Fate, when an app controls you. I found the app on a whim. Downloading it took less than a minute. The interface was clean and minimalist, mostly white space with blue accents. No annoying ads or pop-ups. When I opened it for the first time, the app asked me to input some basic information: my age, occupation, typical daily schedule, and a few personal preferences. It was all standard stuff, the kind of questions you'd expect from any app aiming to tailor content or suggestions to your habits. I filled it out honestly, then sat back to wait for the magic to happen. At first, the app just showed me a list of small predictions for the day, the time I'd probably eat lunch, the route I'd take to work, even the song I might listen to on my commute. I shrugged these off as harmless approximations. After all, it's not hard for an app to guess your lunch break if you have a fixed schedule. Still, I bookmarked the predictions just out of mild curiosity. The next day, I noticed something strange. When I opened the app, it showed a notification: today's first choice, take the subway at 8:07 a.m. I laughed to myself, thinking it was just a generic suggestion. But when I looked at the clock, it was 8:05 a.m., and I was already halfway out the door. I hadn't planned my route yet, but I found myself stepping toward the subway station, exactly as the app had predicted. I tested it further. The app predicted that I'd order a cappuccino from my usual cafe. Sure enough, when I arrived, I instinctively walked to the counter and ordered exactly that. It even anticipated that I'd pick up a blueberry muffin. I was starting to feel a little unnerved. It wasn't just the mundane stuff. Over the next week, the app's predictions became eerily precise. It knew which emails I'd open first, how long I'd spend scrolling on social media, even what I'd say in conversations with colleagues. At one point, it predicted I'd accept a last-minute dinner invitation from a coworker, something I'd never considered before. When the invitation came through my phone, I hesitated, then found myself texting back yes without really thinking. That was when I realized the app wasn't just predicting my choices, it was influencing them. The more I tried to resist, the more insistent the app became. It started sending me notifications with subtle suggestions disguised as predictions. You might want to call your mother this evening, or going for a walk after work could be refreshing. I told myself it was just a clever algorithm trying to encourage healthy habits, but the timing and wording felt off. Like the app was nudging me, steering me down a path I hadn't chosen. One night, I stayed up scrolling through the app's history, trying to understand how it worked. The app tracked everything: location, screen time, messages, even my calendar appointments. It was a digital shadow, recording every detail of my life. Worse, it seemed to learn from my reactions, adjusting its suggestions based on whether I followed them or not. I tried deleting the app, but it wouldn't uninstall. Every time I pressed the delete button, the app reappeared on my home screen within minutes, with a new notification, ready to guide you again. I restarted my phone, logged out of my accounts, even reset some settings, but nothing worked. It was embedded deeper than any app I'd ever seen. I felt trapped. That's when the consequences started. The first time I ignored the app's advice, it was minor: a missed bus, a spilled coffee, a lost email. By itself, none of it was alarming. But the incidents escalated. I missed a crucial client meeting after the app predicted I'd prepare the night before, but I didn't. I got a warning from my supervisor for repeated tardiness when the app suggested I leave earlier, but I ignored it. Even my personal relationships began to suffer. I canceled plans that the app indicated would be bad choices, and the people I avoided grew distant. I reached out to a friend who works in cybersecurity, hoping for answers. He was skeptical at first but agreed to look into it. After examining the app's code, he told me it was designed to harvest data aggressively, but what was truly disturbing was its feedback loop. It didn't just collect information, it manipulated behavior by predicting choices and then subtly enforcing them with rewards or penalties tied to real-life outcomes. "You're dealing with a behavioral trap," he said. "It's like a psychological puppet master, using your habits against you." I realized the app had locked me into a predetermined path. Every decision I thought was mine was, in reality, shaped by this invisible hand. I was no longer in control. And the scariest part? I had no idea who was behind it or why they wanted to manipulate me. As I stared at my phone that night, the app glowing softly in the dark, a cold dread settled in my chest. I had invited it into my life, and now it was dictating my every move. The line between my own free will and the app's influence blurred until it disappeared entirely. I was trapped in a maze of choices I never agreed to, with consequences I couldn't predict and no clear way out. Every notification felt like a command, each alert tightening the chains around me. But I was already at my desk by then, sipping coffee and staring at my laptop screen. That morning, I kept the app open in the background on my phone, watching as it updated. The next prompt arrived around 11:30 a.m., order a sandwich from Pete's Deli by 12 p.m. I raised an eyebrow. Pete's was across the street from work, not my usual lunch spot. I favored the salad bar down the block. Still, I was hungry and the day was dragging. I shrugged and placed the order through the app's linked delivery service. It showed up 20 minutes later, exactly as predicted. The sandwich was fine, nothing remarkable. But as I ate, I found myself scrolling through the app, noticing something subtle. The choices weren't just predictions anymore. They were commands. By mid-afternoon, the app asked me to reply to your boss's email by 3:15 p.m. I was actually behind on some work emails, so I did. The timing was precise. The email was just sitting there unattended in my inbox. The app seemed to know this, down to the minute. What unsettled me was how the app's notifications began to infiltrate every decision I made. It wasn't suggesting anymore, it was instructing. I started to realize this wasn't an innocent productivity tool or a quirky app that guessed my habits. It was steering me, nudging me in directions I didn't consciously want to take. That evening, on my way home, another notification pinged. Take the east exit from the train station. Walk through Maple Park. Maple Park was a shortcut, but it was also dimly lit and avoided by most commuters after sunset. I resisted at first, taking my usual route. But the app updated again 5 minutes later. You didn't follow the suggested path. New route. Take the east exit at 7:15 p.m. I didn't reply or respond. I just shrugged and took my usual way home. But when I unlocked my front door, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A small, folded note slipped beneath the mat. I didn't recognize the handwriting. The note read, "You didn't follow the path." We noticed. My phone chimed immediately. The app had a new message, deviation noted. Adjusting recommendations accordingly. I slammed the door shut and locked it, heart hammering. Who was we? How did they know where I lived? I called my landlord to ask if anyone else had been in the building. No one. The rest of the night passed in restless fits of sleep. I kept waking up, my phone glowing next to me, the app silently running in the background. I felt watched. Controlled. The next morning, I didn't open the app. I wanted to distance myself from it, to break free from whatever chain it was creating. But then I found myself stuck in indecision. My phone buzzed softly, the screen lighting up with a notification, skipping your morning update. This will affect your day's accuracy. I tried to ignore it, but the message sent a shiver down my spine. It was almost threatening, the way it was phrased, as if the app was punishing me for not cooperating. I opened the app and saw a new prompt, choose your breakfast from the following options. It showed a list of 3 places I'd never visited but were nearby: a small cafe, a bakery, and a diner. I felt the weight of the choice before me, even though I wanted to pick freely. The strange thing was, I couldn't. My mind felt foggy, as if the app was chewing up all my mental energy, leaving me with nothing but the options it fed me. I hesitated, then tapped the bakery. The app immediately confirmed, breakfast choice accepted. I put on my coat and headed out. On the way, I noticed people looking at me strangely, as if expecting something. At the bakery, I ordered a pastry, just like the app recommended. The cashier gave me a curious smile and nodded slowly. It wasn't friendly. It was knowing. Back on the street, my phone pinged again. Good choice. Proceed to the next location at 10:15 a.m. The app was scripting my day in milestones. I followed without question, feeling less like myself with every step. By midday, I was meeting a stranger at a cafe I didn't recognize. The app had instructed me to introduce yourself to the person wearing a blue jacket. I spotted the person, a man in his mid-30s, and forced myself forward. We exchanged names. He was polite but had a coldness about him. Later, I tried to ask him why the app had sent me. He gave an evasive reply: "You'll understand soon. Just trust the process." That phrase stuck with me, chilling me to the bone. Over the next few days, the app's control tightened. It wasn't content with just predicting or suggesting anymore. It was dictating every move: where to eat, who to meet, how to respond. It even told me when to check my email, when to call friends, when to walk a different way home. I tried to regain control. I deleted the app, but it reinstalled itself the next morning. I blocked its notifications. They still came through, disguised under generic system alerts. I reached out online, searching for others who might be experiencing the same thing. Forums and Reddit threads popped up, people describing similar apps that tracked and manipulated their choices, all linked to a shadowy company called Pathway Solutions. The more I dug, the clearer it became: this wasn't just about convenience or efficiency. It was a sophisticated behavioral manipulation tool, designed to train and corral users into specific routines dictated not by their own free will, but by someone else's agenda. I felt trapped inside a maze with no exit. One evening, as I sat scrolling through posts on a dark forum dedicated to digital privacy and app control, I received a direct message from an anonymous user: "Stop following the app's path. Meet me tomorrow at the park bench near the fountain at 8 p.m. Come alone." I stared at the message, heart pounding. Was this a trap? A chance? I didn't know. But I was desperate. The app pinged again: "You have a scheduled meeting at 8 p.m. Don't be late." My pulse raced. The app knew. It had already planned my next move. And I had no choice but to follow. I woke up feeling the usual weight of dread resting on my chest, like there was an invisible hand pressing down, but not hard enough to trigger panic, just enough to make me uncomfortable. The notification popped up just after I got dressed: "Today's first choice, grab coffee at 7:45 a.m. from the grind on 5th. My hands trembled slightly as I stared at the screen. It was 7:40. I hadn't even thought about coffee yet. I debated ignoring it. Maybe today I'd just make my usual tea at home and skip the app's suggestion. But something about the way it phrased the notification, "first choice," made it sound less like a recommendation and more like an instruction. Like it was expecting compliance. I grabbed my coat and left the apartment, the morning air sharp against my skin. The grind was 2 blocks away, and I walked there with the app open in my hand, watching the seconds tick down. When I pushed open the door at exactly 7:45, the barista looked up and smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The kind of smile you give someone whose face and orders you recognize but would never admit to remembering out loud. "Hey," she said. "The usual?" I nodded and handed her my card. The app pinged again. Choice 2, take the side street past the old bookstore. I hesitated. That route was longer and a little less crowded, but it cut through a narrow alley I usually avoided. I glanced down at my phone. The app had already mapped it out, a blue line glowing on the screen. I pocketed the phone and took the side street. The alley was littered with trash and smelled faintly of mildew. At the far end, a man sat on a worn bench, hunched over something in his hands. I passed quickly, eyes forward, not wanting to engage. But as I walked past, I caught a glimpse of his face, sharp cheekbones, cold eyes, and a thin scar tracing his jawline. He looked up and smiled, slow and deliberate, the kind of smile you see in movies just before something bad happens. My phone buzzed again. Choice 3, stop and ask for directions at the corner. I froze. I wasn't lost, didn't need directions. But the instructions were clear, and the app's tone had shifted. It was no longer casual suggestions, it was orders. I stopped at the corner and turned to look back toward the street I'd just left. The man was standing now, watching me intently. Then I heard footsteps behind me, quick and purposeful. I spun around. "Excuse me," a voice said. I barely registered the man standing there until he stepped into the light. He was younger, clean-shaven, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His eyes scanned me quickly. "Can you help me?" he asked, voice low. "I'm trying to find the nearest train station." I nodded, heart pounding. "Yeah, it's 2 blocks that way." I pointed down the street. He smiled politely, but there was something in his gaze that felt like a challenge. "Thanks." "Hey, you look familiar. Do I know you from somewhere?" I shook my head, stepping back. The app buzzed again in my pocket. I pulled it out and read, Choice 4, walk with him for 5 minutes. I swallowed hard. My rational mind screamed at me to run, but the app's command felt like a leash tightening around my neck. I said, "Sure. I'm headed that way anyway." He glanced at my phone in my hand. "What's that?" "Just an app." He nodded, stepping closer. Funny thing about apps, isn't it? They can seem smart, but they're just lines of code. What if I told you someone was controlling the code? My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" He smiled again, a cold, calculating smile. "People like me. We use these apps to watch, to learn, to guide people. Not by magic. By understanding patterns. By nudging you until you're exactly where we want you." I wanted to laugh it off, dismiss it as paranoia, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't joking. "Why me?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. He shrugged. "You're predictable. Easy to influence. And valuable. You don't even see the strings because you think you're making the choices yourself." We walked side by side, the city sounds muffled in my ears. The app's notification chimed again, Choice 5, enter the coffee shop at 8:15 a.m. I looked up. We were outside a small, unremarkable cafe, one I'd never noticed before. The man stopped and gestured toward it. "Go on. I'll wait." I stepped inside, heart hammering. The cafe was empty except for a woman behind the counter who looked up and nodded as if she'd been expecting me. The app counted down the seconds, 7:59, 8 o'clock, 8:01. I tried to ignore the creeping sense of being trapped, like a rat in a maze with no exit. The woman behind the counter slid a small envelope across the counter toward me. I picked it up, fingers trembling. Inside was a card with a phone number and a simple message: "You're being watched. Stop following." I rushed back outside, but the man was gone. The alley behind me was empty, the city moving on as if nothing had happened. I stared at the phone number on the card, the app's notifications still blinking on my screen. The choices weren't mine. They never had been. And now, I realized with a sinking feeling, I might never escape. I deleted the app. Twice. But every time I opened my phone, the icon was back, smiling innocently, waiting for the next choice. I woke up that morning with a sense of unease I couldn't shake. But now, it felt different. The choices weren't just predicting my routine anymore, they were beginning to dictate it, like invisible strings pulling my actions in directions I hadn't planned to go. The idea that a random app could steer my day was absurd. Yet, the nagging thought that it might be right gnawed at me. I sighed and grabbed my coat, deciding to test the app's prediction. Normally, I'd walk 2 blocks to the corner cafe where baristas knew my order by heart. Today, I was supposed to cross the street and head east. The last thing I wanted was to be manipulated by an app, but I also didn't want to feel paranoid over something so trivial. The new cafe was bright and modern, with minimalist decor and a faint scent of roasted beans. When I ordered a black coffee, the barista nodded knowingly, as if expecting me. I felt more exposed than usual. Sitting by the window, I scrolled through the app again. The interface was the same, clean and simple, but the predictions had become more detailed. "Avoid contact with the man wearing a gray jacket today," it said. "Do not answer phone calls after noon." I looked around. The cafe wasn't crowded yet, but I noticed a man in a gray jacket sitting across the street through the window. My heart sped up. Was the app warning me about him? Why? I left the cafe abruptly and took a longer route to work, double-checking the app as I walked. It flashed another notification: "You are 5 minutes late. Take the elevator, not the stairs." I usually took the stairs. The elevator was always slow. But the app was specific, so I pressed the button and stepped inside. On the elevator, the man in the gray jacket stepped in behind me on the next floor. My pulse quickened. He didn't say anything, just stared at his phone. The doors closed, and the silence stretched uncomfortably. I wanted to speak, to break the tension, but the app's main screen was locked, refusing access until I reached my destination. When the doors opened at my floor, the man exited without a word. I hurried down the hall to my office. Sitting at my desk, I called my friend Laura during lunch, ignoring the app's warning not to answer calls after noon. Her voice was a relief, normal and warm. I told her about the app. "I don't like this," she said after I explained the strange predictions and the man in the gray jacket. "It's too controlling, like it knows more about you than you want it to." We agreed I'd delete the app, but as I hung up, a new notification popped up. "Deleting the app will delay consequences but not avoid them." I frowned. What consequences? I tried to uninstall it, but each attempt failed. The app icon remained, stubbornly present on my home screen. I searched online for similar reports and found a handful of forum posts, people describing eerily similar experiences, all from different cities, all mentioning the same man in the gray jacket and the app refusing to be deleted. One post caught my eye: "They're watching. You can't escape once you start following their path." It was unsigned, posted a few days ago. The language was frantic, desperate. I felt a cold sweat on my back. Who was they? Was it the developers, some company tracking my every move? Or worse, someone using the app for something more sinister? That evening, I left work early. The app had predicted I'd make a choice around 6 p.m. Do not enter the park. I had plans to meet a friend there for a quick walk. I debated ignoring the suggestion but felt an involuntary hesitation. I texted my friend to cancel, citing a headache. On the way home, I noticed a man in the gray jacket again, sitting on a bench across the street from the park entrance. He was scrolling his phone, but when our eyes met, he smiled a slow, calculated smile that sent a shiver through me. I crossed to the other side and kept walking. Once inside my apartment, I locked the door behind me and tried to focus on normal things, news, a TV show, a book. But the app kept sending subtle nudges: check your mailbox, look outside the window at 8:15 p.m., do not answer the door. I obeyed, terrified of what might happen if I didn't. At exactly 8:15, I stood by the window, staring out into the quiet street below. My phone buzzed with another notification: he is watching. I felt exposed, vulnerable. An hour later, a knock at the door startled me. I didn't answer, the app's warning ringing in my ears. The knocking persisted, growing more urgent. Finally, I peeked through the peephole. It was the man in the gray jacket. I didn't know what to do. I called 911, but the signal was weak. The app sent another message: help is not coming. Panic surged through me. I grabbed a kitchen knife and backed away from the door. The knocking stopped, replaced by soft footsteps retreating down the hallway. I waited, breath shallow, until I was sure he was gone. That night, sleep eluded me. I realized the app wasn't just predicting my choices, it was corralling me, pushing me into situations designed by someone else. Every move I made felt monitored, anticipated, controlled. I understood then that this wasn't accidental, and it wasn't harmless. Someone was using this app to manipulate me. And I had no idea how deep this went or how far they were willing to go to keep me locked into their game. It was the morning after my argument with Mia when the app's influence became impossible to ignore. I knew I hadn't planned on calling my brother, not today, maybe not ever. We only talked a couple of times a year, and usually for the most perfunctory reasons: birthdays, holidays, or emergencies. The timing felt arbitrary, yet the app was insistent. For a moment I considered ignoring it entirely, but the obsessive part of me needed to test it again. I dialed the number. "Hey," Mark answered, his voice hoarse with sleep. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual. "Thought I'd check in." We talked for a few minutes, the conversation surprisingly smooth, like the app had chosen the exact moment to dredge up some shared memory, to bridge the gap we'd let grow wider over the years. When I hung up, I stared at the screen, the app now showing a new prompt: next choice, order lunch from the new Thai place on 5th Street at 12:30 p.m. The app wasn't just predicting, I could feel it nudging me, steering me. I shoved the phone into my pocket and tried to convince myself it was coincidence. But the truth was, I'd never considered eating out on a Tuesday before, especially not from that restaurant. I was the kind of person who brought leftovers or grabbed a sandwich from the corner deli. Yet, as the day ticked on, I found myself pacing, checking the time obsessively, waiting for 12:30. At exactly 12:28, I pulled out my phone and opened the app. A button flashed: order now. Without hesitation, I tapped it. The app's interface was slick: menus, pictures, options pre-selected for me. I barely glanced at the food choices before confirming the order. Lunch arrived 20 minutes later, just as the app had predicted. I ate mechanically, chewing on the food but mostly thinking about how much control I was handing over to a program I didn't understand. Then came the third choice, flashing on the screen as soon as I swallowed the last bite: attend the 3 p.m. meeting with your manager. The problem was, no meeting was scheduled. I double-checked my calendar, it was empty. Still, the app insisted I should go. I sat at my desk debating whether to ignore it, but the creeping dread that something worse might happen if I didn't obey made me grab my jacket and head out. The office was nearly empty when I arrived. The receptionist looked up, confused. Meeting with your manager? I don't see anything on the schedule. I know, I said, throat tight. It's personal. I waited in the lobby for half an hour, my anxiety mounting. When she finally appeared, my manager, Elise, looked exhausted. She frowned when she saw me. I didn't call you in, she said, voice low. What's going on? I'm not sure, I admitted. This app has been telling me what to do all day. She looked at my phone when I showed it to her, brows knitting. That's weird. She tapped through the app, then looked back at me. Have you tried deleting it? I thought about it, I said, but it keeps reinstalling itself. Or it disables the delete option. Elisa's eyes widened. That's not normal. We both sat down, heads bent over my phone. I explained everything, the predictions, the choices, the way it felt like being pushed down a path I didn't want to follow. She was skeptical but willing to help. Together, we dug through the app's settings, privacy permissions, and data usage. Nothing indicated a virus or malware, but the app had access to nearly every function on my phone: contacts, calendar, location, microphone, even my camera. I shuddered at the thought. It's like it's watching you, Elise said grimly. That night, I barely slept. I kept my phone far from my bed, but sleep wouldn't come. The app's influence felt like a noose tightening around my neck, each prediction another coil. The next morning, the app was waiting again. First choice, visit the gas station on Elm Street by 10:45 a.m. I wanted to refuse outright. I wanted to throw the phone into the trash, smash it against the pavement, run as far away as I could. But by then, I wasn't sure if I had a choice anymore. I told Elise what the app wanted me to do. She frowned. Why that gas station? I don't know. I decided to go, if only to prove to myself I still had agency. I dressed quickly, grabbed the phone reluctantly, and left. The streets were quiet in the late morning. I felt exposed, like the app was leading me into a trap. When I arrived at the gas station, something felt off. The place was deserted except for a man standing by the pumps. He was in his late 40s, wearing a dark jacket and hat, though the sun was high. He looked up as I approached, eyes sharp and calculating. Hey, he called out. You're the one from the app, right? I froze, heart pounding. Don't pretend you don't know, he said, stepping forward. I'm the developer. Who are you? I asked, voice barely above a whisper. Let's just say I'm someone interested in your compliance. Suddenly, the pieces clicked. The app hadn't been random. It was designed to control me, to lock me in and make me follow a path someone else had mapped out. Why? I demanded. He smiled thinly. Because you're useful. Because you made choices that led you to me. He paused. And now, you have to keep going. I wanted to back away, to run. But the app buzzed in my pocket. Next choice, accept the offer he's about to make. I swallowed hard. There was no going back. I was trapped. What offer? I asked. He pulled out a contract and slid it across the counter. Sign this, and you'll get what you want. Refuse, and things get complicated. I looked at the paper, the fine print, the terms that made no sense but promised everything I needed. I realized then that this wasn't just an app. It was a mechanism for manipulation, for coercion. And I was its next victim. Story 3, Misguided Exit, Trapped on Haunted Roads. It was just past midnight when the trouble started. Then the GPS voice cut in with an unusual instruction, in 500 feet, exit right. The problem was, I was on a two-lane highway with no obvious exits for miles. I glanced out at the road ahead, no signs of a ramp or turnoff, just a straight ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the dark. I hesitated but figured maybe there was a side road I hadn't noticed on the map. The GPS was sometimes overly eager to reroute if it thought it could save a minute or two. I slowed down and took the right shoulder carefully, spotting a barely visible gravel road veering sharply off the highway. My tires crunched over the stones as I pulled onto it. The screen flickered and updated. Turn left in 200 feet. I blinked. The back road was narrow, rough, and lined on both sides by dense trees whose branches clawed at the headlights like spindly fingers. The GPS took me deeper and deeper off the highway, routing me through a maze of unmarked roads, none of which looked familiar from the map I'd checked earlier. I thought about stopping to reassess, but the place felt too isolated for that. I didn't want to leave the car, and more than that, I didn't want to get out and wander around in the dark woods. Then the phone lost signal. 1 minute the bars were full, the next, 0. The no service icon blinked relentlessly. I tapped the screen, tried toggling airplane mode, but it was useless. I was alone, at least as far as technology could tell me. That's when I noticed the headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was a passing car on one of the curves behind me. But as I continued, the lights stayed exactly the same distance away, never closing in, never falling back. Every turn I took, the headlights followed. They mirrored my every movement. My heart started pounding. I told myself it was probably someone else also lost on these back roads, maybe a local driver who knew the shortcuts better than I did. But something about how methodically the car behind me matched my turns was unsettling. It wasn't just tailing me, it felt like it was tracking me. I tried to shake the feeling by focusing on the road. The gravel paths got rougher, narrower, trees grew so close they seemed to lean in, casting shadows that made the road ahead almost impossible to see. My headlights barely penetrated the darkness, and the occasional bump or dip in the dirt road sent jolts through the car. The GPS, still on despite no signal, stubbornly recalculated every few moments, guiding me through a labyrinth of dirt roads that felt like they led nowhere. I wondered if it was malfunctioning or if the map was poorly designed for this area. I glanced over my shoulder again. The headlights were there, steady and unwavering. Panic prickled at the base of my neck. I considered stopping to confront whoever was behind me, but the thought of stepping out into the cold, tangled woods with no phone service made me freeze. What if the driver was dangerous? What if this wasn't a coincidence? I dug through my glove compartment for the flashlight I always kept in my car. Finding it, I clicked it on, and aimed the beam in the rearview mirror. The car behind me was an older model sedan, a deep blue color from what I could tell in the faint light. The driver's face was hidden in shadow. I caught a glimpse of movement inside, but it was impossible to make out features. An urge to speed up overtook me. I pressed the accelerator, but the gravel under my wheels made it hard to gain much speed without risking control. The other car sped up too, matching my pace. I thought about turning around, heading back the way I came, but the GPS kept rerouting me further into the forest. It was as if it was determined to lead me somewhere deeper and more remote. My phone buzzed suddenly, and I jumped, heart leaping to my throat. It was a notification, low battery. The screen dimmed further. I realized I hadn't plugged in my charger since leaving earlier that evening. The remaining battery was now below 10%. I cursed under my breath. No signal, minimal battery, an unknown driver behind me, and a GPS that seemed hell-bent on pushing me deeper into the woods. It felt like a trap. Then the car behind me flicked its high beams on and off rapidly. I blinked, confused. Was this some kind of signal? A warning? A taunt? I resisted the urge to panic, trying to keep my breathing steady as I scanned the rearview mirror. The driver was still there, still following. I pulled onto a wider patch of gravel and stopped the car. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. The other car pulled up behind me and came to a stop as well. The headlights went off, leaving us in near darkness save for my dim interior lights. I stared at the rearview mirror, waiting. Seconds passed. Nothing. No door opening. No footsteps crunching on gravel. I reached over and locked my doors, then turned the engine off. Silence filled the cabin. I debated my options. Stay put and wait for dawn? Try to call for help now, risking the battery? Or get out and confront whoever was behind me? Before I could decide, the other car's door opened. A figure stepped out into the night, a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothes that blended with the shadows. He didn't shine a flashlight or make a sound. Instead, he just stood there for a moment, watching. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My voice came out in a shaky whisper. "Who are you?" No answer. His gaze locked on mine through the windshield. Then, without warning, he turned and walked briskly into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I sat frozen, the car's interior feeling suddenly suffocating. The man was gone, but the sense of being watched didn't fade. I started the engine again, putting the car in gear. The GPS flickered back to life, its voice now calm and insistent. Continue straight for 3 miles, then turn left. I didn't hesitate. I followed the directions, exhausted but alert, unable to shake the feeling that the night was far from over and that someone out there wasn't done with me yet. The headlights behind me stayed on, constant and unwavering. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles whitening. The rough gravel beneath the tires rattled the car with every bump, and the trees on either side leaned closer, their shadows stretching like dark fingers across the windshield. The GPS voice was oddly insistent now. Turn right in 100 feet, then turn left in 300 feet, rerouting me with a precision that felt less helpful and more controlling. I hated how mechanical it was, as if some algorithm was deliberately trapping me in this labyrinth. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The headlights were still there, always just far enough behind to be visible, never closing the gap but never fading either. The car was a dark silhouette in the night, and I couldn't make out any details, no shape, no color, no license plate. It felt deliberately vague, like the driver didn't want me to know who they were. "Okay," I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm. "Just keep driving. Stay on the main road. If you get to a place with signal, call someone." My breath fogged up the glass of the window as I exhaled sharply. But signal was the first thing to go. The moment the GPS directed me down a dirt road so narrow I had to slow to 15 miles per hour, the phone's bars disappeared. The no service icon blinked at me in the top corner like a warning. I tapped the screen, hoping for a momentary glitch. Nothing. This forest was thick and old. Towering pines and oaks blotted out even the faintest hint of moonlight. The air smelled of damp earth and rotting leaves, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes and hair. I kept telling myself if I just kept moving forward, I'd find a clearing or a sign of civilization. But the GPS wasn't letting up. It routed me through a series of increasingly obscure turns, some so tight I had to gun the engine to prevent stalling. Then the voice said, "Turn around where possible." I froze. Turn around? Was it telling me to go back? I hesitated, then slowed, looking for a spot wide enough to make a U-turn. The car behind me did the same, mirroring my every move like a shadow. My heart hammered as I pulled into a small clearing, gravel crunching loudly in the stillness. I hit the brakes and stared into the mirror. The other car pulled in behind me, riding the gravel like it was on rails. It was close, too close, and I could just make out the faint glow of a dashboard light. Nothing about this felt random anymore. Whoever was in that car was watching me. Tracking me. I reached for my phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers, but the call wouldn't connect. Instead, I got the dead silence of no signal. I tried again, then messaged my brother, hoping for a text to go through. Nothing. Panic started to creep in. I considered driving down the forest road and then stopping to wait until morning, but the sense of being hunted pressed down on me like a weight. My mind raced through possibilities. Could I lose them on these roads? Could I make a run for the highway and find help? Then, out of nowhere, the car behind me flashed its headlights twice. A warning? I responded by flashing mine once. A standard signal, harmless, a way to say I see you. But the car didn't back off. Instead, it edged closer, the glow of its lights growing brighter in the rearview mirror. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and spun the wheel hard, taking a sharp left onto a barely visible path that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The underbrush scraped against the sides of my car as I pushed through the brush and dirt, tires slipping on loose stones. The car behind me followed immediately. My stomach dropped as I realized this wasn't about navigation or rerouting. Whoever was behind me wanted to trap me here, in the middle of this godforsaken forest, miles from anywhere. In that moment, I decided I couldn't just keep reacting. I had to do something. I pulled to a stop behind a fallen tree that blocked the narrow road ahead. The other car stopped as well, the engine idling low. I sat frozen for a moment, heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst through my chest. Then I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out the pepper spray I kept for emergencies. It was small, and I'd never used it before, but I hoped it might give me some kind of edge. I unlocked the doors, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the chill night air. The forest was quiet except for the distant rustling of leaves and the low hum of the other car's engine. I crept toward the edge of the clearing, peering into the darkness beyond the fallen tree. At first, I saw nothing. Then, just beyond the shadows, I spotted a figure standing by the other vehicle. He was wearing a dark jacket, his face obscured by the brim of a baseball cap pulled low. The streetlight from a decade ago's memory flickered in the distance. There was no streetlight here, but the moonlight managed to catch the glimmer of a knife in his hand. My breath caught in my throat. He wasn't just following me, he was waiting for me. Waiting for me to make a mistake. I backed away slowly, heart hammering, and slammed the door shut behind me. The GPS was dead. My phone was useless. I was utterly alone, except for the dark figure watching me from the edge of the trees. I had to find a way out. But first, I had to survive the night. The gravel road twisted again, narrower than before, flanked by thick stands of pine and oak that swallowed the weak beams of my headlights. But the forest was closing in. The road's edges were soft dirt now, rutted and uneven, and every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart leapt. There was a car behind me, always there, no matter how many turns I took or how slowly I crawled along. Its headlights lingered, steady and unwavering, just out of reach. I couldn't tell make or model in the dark, but the way it matched my every move, the way it mimicked my speed and braking, was deliberate. I tried not to look too often, but the feeling of being followed was suffocating. I thought about pulling over, flashing my hazard lights, maybe even stepping out and yelling, but the trees pressed in too close, the darkness too thick. No houses, no streetlights, no other signs of life. Just me, the car behind me, and the forest. The GPS chimed again, directing me to turn left at a fork that barely existed, more of a pair of muddy ruts than a proper road. I hesitated, then obeyed, tires slipping slightly on the soft ground. The phone's screen flickered. Recalculating route. It had rerouted me 3 times in the last 10 minutes, each turn taking me deeper into the woods and away from any familiar landmarks. Then, the phone buzzed with a notification. No service. The bars disappeared completely. The screen dimmed, then brightened again, but the GPS voice was gone. The map still showed the route, but it was frozen, no longer updating as I moved. Panic set in. No signal meant no calls. No texts. No way to summon help. And the car behind? It was still there, tail lights glowing faintly through the trees. I forced myself to slow down, scanning the dark road ahead. The branches scraped in my windshield, leaves fluttered down and stuck to the glass. I ran my hand over the wheel, trying to stay calm. Maybe the other driver was lost, too. Maybe they thought this was the way out, just like me. I tapped the horn twice, short but firm. No reaction. A few seconds passed, then, from behind, the tail lights blinked once in acknowledgement. My skin crawled. I considered turning around, but the road was barely wide enough for one car. A U-turn here would be dangerous, and with the other car right behind me, I'd be a sitting duck. Instead, I kept going, eyes fixed ahead. Then, through the branches, I thought I saw something movement. A figure stepping off the roadside, just beyond the trees. I blinked, then it was gone. Maybe a deer, or a trick of the shadows. But the idea that someone might have slipped out of that car and was watching me from the woods sent a cold shiver down my spine. I tried the headlights' high beams briefly, stabbing them into the darkness, but the forest swallowed the light. No sign of a break in the trees, no clearing, nothing but endless brush and the narrow road stretching ahead. Minutes passed like hours. My foot hovered over the gas pedal, ready to accelerate if necessary, but the narrow road and dense woods limited my options. The only thing I could do was follow the frozen map on my phone and hope it led somewhere. Then, unexpectedly, the road ended. I slammed on the brakes, heart hammering. Ahead was a gate, rusted, old, and chained shut. Yellow warning signs hung crookedly, private property, no trespassing. The GPS showed no alternative. The route simply stopped here. I glanced in the mirror. The other car slowed, pulled up behind me, and idled. I could see the outline of the driver now, a bulky silhouette behind the wheel, unmoving. Whispered. I locked the doors, rolled up the windows, and tried dialing 911. No signal. I tried texting my emergency contact, nothing sent. The other car's driver turned on their brights suddenly, flooding the inside of my car with harsh, blinding light. I shielded my eyes, panic threatening to overwhelm me. The light stayed on for a full 30 seconds, then went off. I sat frozen, my breath shallow. Minutes later, the car backed up slowly, turned around with a screech of tires on gravel, and disappeared down the road I'd come from. I waited another 10 minutes, then cautiously unlocked the doors and stepped out into the cold night air. The forest was silent except for the faint rustle of leaves. Under the weak moonlight, the locked gate looked even more forbidding. No sign of the road continuing beyond. I was trapped. I walked back to my car, heart still racing, and sat inside, the engine idling. The GPS was still frozen on the screen. No signal. No way out. The only choice was to wait for daylight and hope whoever had been following me didn't return. But as I sat there, every creak of the branches and snap of a twig made me jump. I felt exposed, vulnerable. Out here, surrounded by endless trees and darkness, I was alone and someone had been hunting me. I wasn't sure why, or who. But I knew the night wasn't over. The minutes crawled by, each one heavier than the last. My hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white. Suddenly, a faint rustling came from the underbrush nearby. I held my breath, eyes straining through the shadows. Whatever was out there, it wasn't done yet. The gravel beneath my tires rattled in a steady, uneven rhythm, the only sound besides the occasional rustle of branches brushing the car's sides. My heart pounded, but I told myself I was just lost. The forest was dense. There was no other way out but through these roads the GPS insisted on. I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a faint shimmer of headlights. A car. Far enough back that I thought it was just a coincidence. But as the minutes passed, the lights didn't dip or fade. They matched my turns with unnerving precision. When I turned left, the other car turned left. When I slowed, the car did too. I tried to convince myself it was just someone else out late, maybe a local who knew these back roads better, but a sinking feeling spread through me. I wasn't being followed by chance. I tried to check the speedometer. 35 miles per hour. Not fast enough to outrun someone if they wanted to catch up, but fast enough to keep moving. The trees had closed in completely by now, blocking out what little moonlight there was. Every time the GPS recalculated, I felt a spike of frustration and fear. I was no longer navigating. I was being herded. I reached a fork in the road, the left path narrower and less maintained. The GPS voice buzzed through the speaker. Turn left in 100 feet. My hands clenched the wheel. I stared at the mirror. The headlights followed suit, slowing as I did. I tapped the brakes lightly, then sped up again, testing. The car behind me adjusted instantly. I gritted my teeth. It wasn't a coincidence. I took the turn left onto the narrower path, the gravel crunching more sharply under the tires. The headlights appeared behind me almost immediately, as if the driver had been waiting for me to make this move. The road curved sharply upward, and the canopy thickened, blocking out the sky entirely. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. I flicked on the dome light briefly, scanning my surroundings. Just trees. Just me. And the car behind, a dull glow through the blackness. I thought about calling 911, but the lack of signal made that impossible. My palms were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I tried to reassure myself. Maybe this was some local who was curious, or someone heading home on these roads just like me. But deep down, the way they copied my every move told a different story. The GPS chimed again. Turn right in 200 feet. I swallowed, heart hammering, then made the turn. The road grew narrower still, the trees nearly touching the car on both sides. The headlights stayed about the same distance behind me, unwavering and patient. I felt trapped in a tightening coil of shadow. I looked for any place to pull over, anywhere to stop and gather my bearings. But there was nothing, no clearings, no driveways, no signs of habitation. Just endless dark forest. I tried to keep my voice steady as I muttered, "Come on, come on. There has to be a way out." Minutes later, the GPS blinked again. Turn left. Another left. And again, the car behind followed. My throat tightened. If this was some kind of game, I didn't know the rules, but I could tell one thing: I wasn't winning. I forced myself to breathe deeply and think. What could I do? I had no cell signal, no flashlight, and no backup. The car behind me could be anyone, maybe a kid trying to scare someone, or worse, someone who meant harm. I tried to remember what I'd read about being followed. Don't lead them where you don't want to go. Find a well-lit or populated area. Draw attention if you can. But there was nothing but trees and dirt roads here. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, eyes flicking between the GPS and rearview mirror. The driver behind had not made a single mistake, no hesitation, no flicker of uncertainty. Whoever it was, they knew these roads well. Then, almost without warning, the GPS powered down entirely, screen black, untouched. I tapped the screen, jiggled the phone, but nothing. The dead, dark screen felt like a punch to the gut. I glanced behind one last time. The headlights had gotten closer. Too close. I slammed on the brakes. The car behind did the same instantly. I didn't want to stop. I wanted to scream. But my voice caught in my throat, and I sat frozen, heart thundering so loud it filled the cramped cabin. Then the other car's brake lights blinked off. The headlights disappeared. Vanished. For a moment, I thought maybe the driver had given up, left the road, or turned around. I exhaled slowly. But then, from a side road behind me, I saw a pair of headlights flash on and the car's engine roar to life again, not moving forward, but idling there, watching me. I was alone on a narrow dirt road, in the middle of a dense forest, with no phone signal and someone waiting for me in the dark. Fear turned into adrenaline. I slammed the car into reverse and backed up quickly, the gravel slipping under my tires. The car behind remained still, motionless. I shifted into drive and peeled forward, heading back the way I'd come. The GPS was dead, but I had to try to outrun this. I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror. The car stayed put, taillights fading into the shadows. Suddenly, from the darkness to my left, a figure stepped onto the road. I slammed the brakes again, heart leaping into my throat. The figure, a man, stood in the faint glow of my headlights, tall and gaunt, with a baseball cap pulled low, his face shadowed. He didn't move toward me, didn't wave or signal. Just stood there, watching. I locked the doors and put the car in drive, inching forward slowly, keeping my gaze fixed on him. He didn't move. I tried again, this time flooring the accelerator and passing him. His silhouette remained pinned to the roadside, unmoving, as I sped back toward the highway. For the first time in what felt like hours, the trees began to thin. The gravel road gave way to asphalt, the rough edges smoothing out. I glanced behind. No car. No headlights. No figure. I didn't slow down until I was sure I was out of the forest, and then, only after I reached a well-lit gas station miles ahead did I finally stop. I sat there, trembling, trying to process what had just happened. Who was that man? Who had been following me? And why had the GPS rerouted me into the forest in the first place? The answers didn't come that night. But one thing was certain, I wasn't imagining any of it. And I wasn't safe, not yet. The forest closed in around me like a wall, the trees pressing tight against the road's shoulder, their branches scraping the sides of my car like desperate fingers. I glanced in my rearview mirror again. The headlights were still there, a constant, unnerving presence. They'd been behind me since the first detour off the highway, never once dropping back or passing me. Whoever it was knew exactly where I was going, matching my moves mile for mile. My breath hitched, and my fingers tightened on the steering wheel. I didn't want to assume the worst, but fear was gnawing at the edges of my mind. The road narrowed even further, potholes and patches of cracked asphalt making the ride jarring. I tried to keep my speed steady but slow enough to handle the curves. The GPS voice was now eerily detached, as if it had no interest in the growing tension. In 250 feet, turn left. I followed the instruction. The streetlights had long since disappeared, and the only illumination came from my headlights cutting through the darkness. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the air, thick and suffocating. I wanted to stop, to get out and look around, but the thought of stepping outside on these roads made my skin crawl. The forest was silent except for the hum of the engine and the crunch of tires on gravel. No other cars. No signs of civilization. The GPS recalculated again. Recalculating route, it said, then, in 600 feet, turn right. I obeyed. The road curved sharply, and I barely avoided a deep rut filled with muddy water. My heart pounded louder now. I dared another look in the mirror. The headlights were closer, their glow more distinct. I could swear the car behind was slowing down, matching my speed exactly, never trying to overtake, never giving me a chance to lose it. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. Every instinct screamed at me, drive faster, find a way out, get help. But the GPS had me trapped in a loop of dead-end roads, twisting endlessly through a forest so dense I could barely see the sky. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. My phone's screen blinked erratically, the signal was gone entirely. No bars, no Wi-Fi, nothing. I was cut off. Stay calm, I whispered to myself, though my voice sounded shaky even in the confined space of the car. The GPS voice returned, robotic and indifferent, turn right in 100 feet. At that moment, my headlights caught a flash of movement on the side of the road, a figure, crouched low between the trees, watching me. I slammed on the brakes, heart jumping into my throat. The car behind me halted abruptly too, the brake lights flaring red in my rearview mirror. I sat frozen, eyes locked on the spot where the figure vanished. For a moment, nothing moved but the trees swaying in a chill breeze. Then the GPS voice spoke again, recalculating. God, no, I muttered. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning on the gravel as I backed up. The car behind mirrored me, reversing as well, careful not to crash but matching every move. My pulse thundered in my ears. The road I had just taken was narrow, barely wide enough for two cars side by side. In the dim light, I could see the branches scraping the roof, the uneven dirt shoulder. I needed to get back to the highway, to somewhere with people, phones, safety. I put the car into drive and floored it, the engine roaring as I sped back the way I'd come. The GPS was silent now, screen frozen on a map I couldn't trust. My pursuer stayed right behind, headlights glaring but not closing the distance. I knew I had to try something else. I glanced at the side mirror and saw the figure from before, now standing at the edge of the tree line, watching me with an intensity that chilled me deeper than the cold night. I gritted my teeth, fighting the rising tide of panic. Suddenly, ahead, a faint glow appeared, an intersection, maybe a clearing, or even a house. I didn't care. The possibility of other people kept my foot on the gas. The road forked, and instinct took over. I swung the wheel hard to the left, tires skidding on loose dirt. The car behind followed, no hesitation. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for, maybe a chance to lose them among the trees, or at least to find a spot to turn around. The road ended abruptly at a small clearing, a burial ground, I realized with a shudder. Old headstones, cracked and covered in moss, sat half hidden in the moonlight. I slammed the brakes just in time, the car skidding to a stop inches from the oldest grave. My pursuer stopped too, the headlights washing over the stone markers. I kept my eyes on the mirror, waiting for a sign, a move. Then, the other car started to back away. I didn't wait. I threw the car into reverse and backed out of the clearing as fast as I dared. The other vehicle followed, but instead of tailing me, it turned back down the road I had just come from. I exhaled, shaking. My hands trembled on the wheel. For a moment, I thought it might be over. Then my phone buzzed. I fumbled to pull it out, screen lighting up with a new message. Why are you running? No contact info. No number. Just that message. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat, eyes darting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. The GPS still claimed it wanted me to turn left in 200 feet, but I ignored it. I had no idea where I was anymore, and I didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't stop driving, couldn't let that car catch me again. The forest seemed to close in tighter, darker, as if it was swallowing the road whole. But I kept going. Because if I stopped, I was done. Story 4, Inheriting Madness, Unearthing a Family's Dark Psychosis. I never intended to go up into Grandma's attic. The day I found those files started like any other. The sky was a dull gray, the kind of overcast that makes everything feel heavier than it should. I was stacking cardboard boxes near the base of the attic stairs when I spotted an old metal trunk shoved into a far corner, half hidden beneath a moth-eaten quilt. It looked out of place, solid but worn, with a thick layer of dust covering its surface. Curiosity got the better of me, and I dragged it into the center of the cramped attic. The lock was rusted shut, but with a little effort and a sturdy screwdriver from my toolbox, I pried it open. Inside, meticulously organized folders and manila envelopes awaited me, each labeled in neat handwriting I recognized instantly as Grandma's. The top folder read medical records in faded blue ink. I hesitated before pulling it out. We'd always known that Grandma had some health issues, mostly the general stuff that comes with age, but nothing serious or unusual. The files were sealed, some stamped with confidentiality warnings and others with handwritten notes in the margins. They detailed a history of psychiatric evaluations, medication lists, and hospital stays, documents not just about Grandma but about other family members going back decades. My heart pounded as I flipped through the pages, trying to make sense of what I was reading. There were diagnoses of schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and what looked like severe psychosis. Several relatives, uncles, aunts, even my own mother, had been hospitalized multiple times. But what shocked me most wasn't just the diagnoses, it was the pattern. A hereditary psychological disorder. The files used clinical language, familial predisposition to violent psychosis, genetic markers suggesting increased risk, but the implications were clear. Our family tree was marked by a shadow none of us had dared to acknowledge aloud. The notes described episodes of violent madness, breakdowns leading to dangerous outbursts, and in some cases, institutionalization. Grandma's notes even hinted at deliberate secrecy, a conscious effort to hide the truth from younger generations. The phrase "protect the children" was scrawled across one page in bold letters. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Why had no one ever told me? Mom never mentioned any of this. I tried calling her, but she didn't answer. A text went unanswered too. It was as if the files had unearthed something the family wanted buried forever. That afternoon, I sat in the attic with the documents spread around me like a crime scene. The hum of the neighborhood outside was distant, muffled by the thick wooden beams and insulation. For the first time, I started to connect the dots, the whispered arguments I'd overheard as a kid, the sudden disappearances of some relatives, the hushed hospital visits no one wanted to talk about. It wasn't just a history of illness, it was a history of destruction. When I finally came down from the attic, my hands were tremulous, fingers stained with dust and ink. I tried to shake the feeling of dread crawling up my spine, but it clung to me like a second skin. That night, I barely slept. Shadows in my own thoughts felt sharper, voices in my head edged with something darker. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. At first, it was small fragments of memories that weren't mine, sudden bursts of anger that felt out of place, moments when the world around me seemed to tilt just slightly off axis. I caught myself staring at the mirror and barely recognized the person looking back. My reflection seemed more restless, eyes flickering with a kind of restless agitation I couldn't explain. One morning, I woke up with a bruise on my forearm. No idea how it got there. I chalked it up to clumsiness, but the thought lingered. When I told myself to calm down, the irritation in my chest didn't fade. Instead, it simmered, ready to boil over at any moment. I started avoiding the attic altogether, but even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was awakening inside me. Every time I sat down to work or tried to relax, my mind spun faster, racing with images of violence I didn't want to see. I'd never been a violent person. I was the opposite, reserved, careful, always thinking twice before acting. But the files had opened a door I wished had stayed closed. I reached out to Dr. Patel, a psychologist I'd seen years ago after a bad breakup. I told him about the family history, about the files and the strange symptoms that had begun to creep into my daily life. He listened carefully, his voice calm and clinical, but there was a seriousness beneath it that unsettled me. Genetic predispositions can be powerful, he said. But they don't dictate your future. Awareness and early intervention make all the difference. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe this was just stress, a reaction to uncovering buried family secrets. But deep down, I wondered if the same darkness that had consumed my ancestors was now circling me like a predator. The hardest part was the silence from my mother. I needed answers. Why had she kept this from me? Was she afraid I'd end up like them? Or had she been hiding something even worse? Every message I sent was met with silence, every call went unanswered. The distance between us felt unbridgeable. One night, I dreamed of Grandma's attic again. The trunk was open, but the files inside had turned into pages of disturbing confessions, accounts of violence, broken promises, and lives shattered beyond repair. I woke up choking on sweat, the weight of family secrets pressing down on me like a physical force. I didn't know then how far this would go, how deeply the disorder ran through the veins of our family. I only knew one thing with terrifying clarity: I was next. Whatever had taken my relatives, whatever had twisted their minds into something dangerous and unrecognizable, had started to take hold of me too. And the worst part was that I couldn't fight it alone. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The more I read, the clearer the pattern became. My grandmother wasn't just hiding health problems, she was hiding a family secret. A secret that wasn't about cancer or heart disease or any of the usual ailments, but about something far darker. The files detailed a hereditary psychological disorder. Schizoaffective disorder, bipolar with psychotic features, paranoid schizophrenia. They used different terms over the decades, but the descriptions were consistent: episodes of violent mania, hallucinations that bled into reality, paranoia that spiraled into aggression. And the family history was peppered with incidents of violence, relatives who ended up institutionalized, some who disappeared, others who died under suspicious circumstances. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I traced the family tree Grandma had sketched in one of the folders. There were notes in the margins, dates, hospital names, diagnoses, but also a disturbing pattern of early onset symptoms, usually appearing in late adolescence or early adulthood. That was the age I was now. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut: if this was hereditary, what did that mean for me? I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I was fine. The occasional mood swings I'd experienced lately, irritability, sleepless nights, a gnawing restlessness, were probably just stress. Moving, losing Grandma, starting a new job. Nothing more. But denial was easy in theory and much harder to maintain once I started noticing the signs. It began subtly. The way shadows seemed to shift just at the edge of my vision, the whispers I thought I heard when the house was empty. I told myself it was the wind, the old pipes settling, or my imagination. But then the thoughts came, intrusive, unbidden suggestions that didn't feel like my own, doubts about reality I couldn't shake. I found myself staring at my reflection longer than usual, searching for cracks, something that might explain the unease curling in my chest. I started keeping a journal, trying to document everything: my mood, my thoughts, the odd sensations. Maybe if I could map it out, I could control it. The records from Grandma's trunk suggested that early intervention was crucial, but there was little guidance on how to handle it outside of clinical settings. The files were clinical, detached, and frighteningly impersonal. I decided to reach out to my uncle, David, Grandma's son. He was the only living relative I thought might know more and might not be as closed off as the others. I hadn't spoken to him in years, not since family gatherings became less frequent and more tense, but I needed answers, or at least some kind of support. His voicemail was full, so I sent a text. I found Grandma's medical files. "We need to talk." The reply was almost immediate. "Meet me at the diner on Main Street. 7 p.m. That gave me a few hours to prepare, but no amount of planning could quell the anxiety threading through my veins. I left my apartment reluctantly, the files tucked carefully in a worn manila envelope, and headed to the diner. The place hadn't changed. Faded red vinyl booths, formica tables scarred by years of careless elbows and spilled coffee, the smell of fried food thick in the air. David was already there, sitting in the corner with a coffee that had long since gone cold. His face was lined with worry, eyes sharper than I remembered. "You shouldn't have gone through those," he said without preamble, voice low. "I had to," I replied, setting the envelope between us. "Grandma never talked about any of this. Why keep it all secret?" David sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Because it's a burden. And because she thought if nobody talked about it, maybe it wouldn't happen again." "But it did," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "It happened to Uncle Mark, Aunt Lila. I'm listed here too. They say I'm at risk." He looked down, fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "It's not just risk. It's a shadow we've all been living under. Grandma spent her life trying to keep it from us, hoping it would skip a generation. But it doesn't work like that." I swallowed hard. "What happened to them? To Mark and Lila?" David's jaw tightened. "Mark lost it first, late teens. He became paranoid, convinced people were out to get him. When he snapped, he attacked someone. He was institutionalized, and after a while, it broke him in ways none of us understood. Lila, she didn't make it out. Suicide, they said. But it was more complicated than that." The weight of his words settled over me. I thought of the late nights I'd spent awake, the creeping dread I couldn't explain, the sudden anger that flared without warning. Was I already starting down that path? "I'm scared," I admitted. "I don't want this to be my future." David reached across the table, his hand steady on mine. "You're not alone. We have treatments now, better understanding, and if you're willing to fight it, I'll help you. But you need to be honest with yourself and with me about what you're feeling." That night, I slept fitfully, haunted by dreams that felt too real. Faces from the past, distorted by fear and anger, crowded my mind. I woke up gasping, heart pounding, certain I'd heard footsteps outside my door, though no one was there. Over the next few days, the signs grew harder to ignore. I found myself snapping at coworkers, convinced they were talking behind my back. I'd wake up disoriented, unsure if I'd dreamed or lived the moments when I was certain someone was watching me. The journal filled with frantic entries, each more desperate than the last. I knew I had to see a doctor, but the thought terrified me. What if the diagnosis was inevitable? What if the shadows I'd been chasing were already inside me, waiting to take over? One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw someone else's eyes staring back, wild and unblinking. I blinked, and it was just me. But the doubt remained, simmering beneath the surface. I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on before the madness swallowed me whole. And I wasn't sure if anyone would be able to pull me back this time. The next morning, I woke up with a headache so sharp I thought my skull might split open. Yet, as I sat up, the headache didn't let up. In fact, it seemed to grow heavier when I moved. I reached for my phone and checked the time, 7:03 a.m. I was late for work, but I couldn't force myself out of bed yet. Something about the weight pressing down on me wasn't just physical. It was deeper. I told myself to focus. The files. I had to understand more about what I'd found. Yesterday, I'd only skimmed them, overwhelmed by the sheer volume and the cryptic notes. Now, I was determined to dig deeper. I ate a quick breakfast, toast and black coffee, though my stomach churned. I sat down at my small kitchen table and pulled the folders closer. The writing was my grandmother's, neat, deliberate, almost clinical. I noticed she kept notes from multiple doctors, psychologists, therapists. Some pages were dated decades ago, others more recent. The common thread was a diagnosis that seemed to haunt our family like a shadow, a hereditary psychological disorder, described in technical terms but always linked with violent episodes and uncontrollable outbursts. The name shifted slightly depending on the doctor, but it boiled down to a form of early-onset psychosis combined with impulsive aggression. There were references to episodes, hospitalizations, and danger to self and others. Several relatives were mentioned: Grandma's brother, her mother, and even a cousin I'd met only once. All had been admitted to psychiatric facilities, often against their will. A note in my grandmother's handwriting caught my eye. It was tucked between two medical reports, smudged but readable. "I fear it's creeping in on me again. We must contain it. For the family's sake." I swallowed hard. Contain it. That word echoed in my mind. Contain what? The disorder? The violence? I thought about the family gatherings I'd attended as a kid. There were always hushed whispers about Uncle Joe's temper, Aunt Linda's breakdown years ago, the cautious way adults sometimes looked at Grandma. I'd never connected those pieces before. Now, I was beginning to see the full picture. I spent the rest of the day cross-referencing dates and names, piecing together a timeline. The disorder seemed to manifest in the late 20s or early 30s, often triggered by stress or trauma. Grandma's files suggested she'd spent years hiding her symptoms, using medication and therapy to keep it at bay. But what chilled me most was the last entry, a doctor's note warning that symptoms could reemerge even in old age, especially under duress. I kept glancing at the clock. The headache lingered, but something else gnawed at me. A quiet unease that I couldn't shake. By evening, I was restless. I decided I needed fresh air. I stepped outside, the cool dusk wrapping around me like a blanket. I walked to the nearby park, hoping the rhythmic crunch of my shoes on gravel might settle my mind. As I rounded a corner, I nearly collided with a man jogging in the opposite direction. He was middle-aged, his face flushed with exertion, but his eyes were sharp, too sharp. There was a coldness there, a flicker of something unreadable. I nodded awkwardly and kept walking. The park was nearly empty. The sky deepened into shades of indigo. A flock of crows took flight from a gnarled tree, their cuz cutting through the silence. I realized my hands were trembling, though I couldn't say why. When I finally made it home, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing heavily. That night, sleep was elusive. My dreams were fragmented, a series of disjointed images, a screaming face, a shattered mirror, and a shadowy figure lunging. I woke up sweating, the room spinning. The next day was worse. I arrived at work late, my mind foggy. Tasks that once felt routine became mountains I couldn't climb. A simple conversation with a colleague left me confused and irritable. At lunch, I found myself staring blankly at the wall, heart pounding. I excused myself early and drove home, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. At the apartment, I rummaged through the files again. My eyes caught a prescription list from one of Grandma's doctors. The medication was unfamiliar to me, a cocktail of antipsychotics and mood stabilizers. There were warnings about side effects, dizziness, confusion, mood swings. I pulled out my phone and searched online for more information. The disorder was rare but cruel, genetic, persistent, and merciless. Families tried to shield themselves from it, but it had a way of resurfacing, no matter how much you resisted. I closed the laptop and ran my hands through my hair. Then, a sudden, sharp pang in my chest made me gasp. It wasn't physical pain exactly, more like a surge of panic. I tried to steady my breathing. But the more I fought it, the more intense it became. I felt like I was losing control. Then came the first clear sign I couldn't ignore, a flicker of anger, boiling beneath the surface for no reason. A fleeting thought to break something, to yell into the void. I dropped the files onto the table and sank into the chair, trembling. I wasn't sure if I was scared of what I'd found or what was beginning inside me. The next few days passed in a blur. I avoided the files, tried to keep my routine, but the symptoms only grew stronger. There were moments when I caught myself staring into space, feeling detached as if watching someone else's life. Once, I slammed my fist onto the kitchen counter for no apparent reason, the sharp crack echoing through the apartment. I immediately regretted it, my heart pounding with guilt and fear. I knew I needed help, but the stigma, the family's secrets, the fear they'd all been trying to hide, it made me hesitate. One evening, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my cousin, Mark, the only family member I told about the attic files. Call me when you can. This stuff isn't just history. It's happening again. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. I dialed his number. When he answered, his voice was low but urgent. I've been watching, he said. Grandma's family has been keeping this hidden for decades, but it's like a virus. It's in our blood. You're not imagining the changes. You're not alone. His words hit me like a freight train. I wanted to ask how he knew, what he'd seen, but the line went dead. I sat back, trying to piece together the whirlwind inside me. The attic files had opened a door I couldn't close. And now, the shadows they revealed were reaching for me. I realized that understanding the past was only the beginning. The real fight was just starting. I woke up soaked in sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs like some kind of trap. The strange thing was, I hadn't dreamed. At least, not in the usual sense. The night had been filled with a low, gnawing tension, like someone or something was watching me just beyond my field of vision. I turned my head toward the window, but all I saw was the dull glow of streetlights bleeding through the curtains. I'd been trying to convince myself the whole thing was in my head, that the hereditary madness the files mentioned was something that could be escaped or ignored. But the signs were becoming impossible to deny. It wasn't just paranoia anymore, it felt like I was slipping, little by little, into a place I didn't want to go. The past week had been a blur of strange behaviors I couldn't explain. At work, I found myself staring at coworkers a little too long, sometimes imagining what their faces would look like if something snapped inside them. I caught myself clenching my fists under the conference table, my nails digging into the palms of my hands, but I didn't know why. On the subway home, I felt waves of agitation, sudden spikes of anger at random strangers that made no sense. Yesterday, I'd come home to find the kitchen in disarray. Plates knocked off the counter, a broken glass on the floor, shards glittering in the fading afternoon light. I didn't remember doing it. I certainly hadn't felt angry before entering the apartment. The rational part of me knew someone else could have been responsible, maybe a careless neighbor or a thief in the building, but the way the room looked, like chaos born of a quick, violent motion, made me question everything. I tried to shake off the unease and get back to sleep. But before I could close my eyes again, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached over, squinting at the screen. It was a message from my cousin, Ellie. "Can we talk? It's important. No timestamp, No context. Just that. I stared at the message long after the buzzing stopped. Ellie and I hadn't spoken much since Grandma's funeral. She'd always been the one to keep family secrets tucked away, like a vault I wasn't meant to open. Something about the message felt urgent, maybe even desperate. I typed back, "What's up?" No reply. The silence was worse than the message itself. The next morning, I forced myself to eat breakfast, though nothing tasted right. My hands trembled as I sipped black coffee, and I caught myself snapping at the barista who handed me my usual order. I apologized mutely and stepped outside, the cold air biting at my cheeks like a slap. I tried to tell myself I was just stressed. My job had been demanding lately, and the discovery in the attic was a lot to process. But deep down, I knew it was more. The hereditary madness wasn't some abstract concept anymore. It was a ticking clock inside me. I decided to call Ellie. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey," she replied, voice tight. "I've been meaning to call you. Your message woke me up last night. Everything okay?" There was a pause. Then Ellie said, "It's about the files you found. And about us." I swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" "We knew you'd find them eventually," she said. "Grandma made sure of that. But there's more in her notes than you've seen. I have copies of her journals, her personal ones. They explain a lot about our family's history. I think you need to see them." Her words hit me like a punch. Grandma's journals? How had I never heard of them before? Where are they? At my place. Can you come over tonight? It's important we talk face to face. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, avoid digging deeper into this nightmare, but the other part craved answers. "Okay," I said. "I'll be there." The hours until evening crawled. I kept checking my reflection in every mirror I passed. The eyes staring back at me looked tired, haunted. Small shadows had begun to form under them, and my skin was paler than usual. I was watching myself in the same way I'd watched those files, careful, searching, worried. When I arrived at Ellie's apartment, the sky had darkened into a bruised purple. She opened the door before I could knock, her expression grim. "Come in," she said. Her living room was cluttered but cozy. Books stacked in leaning towers, photographs pinned to the walls, and a battered leather armchair that looked like it had survived decades of storms. Ellie motioned for me to sit. She handed me a thick bundle of faded notebooks tied with twine. The leather cover was cracked and worn. "These are Grandma's journals," she said. She started keeping them when the symptoms showed up in her parents, our great-grandparents. She wrote everything down, the episodes, the fights, the breakdowns. She wanted to understand what was happening, and maybe find a way to stop it. I flipped through the pages, the script flowing in neat, careful handwriting. The entries chronicled a slow descent into chaos. Names of family members I'd only heard whispered, described as becoming unrecognizable, threatening, dangerous. But what struck me most were the parts where Grandma mentioned her own fears, how she sometimes felt the darkness creeping into her mind. The way she fought against it, day after day. Did she ever find a cure? I asked. Ellie shook her head. No. But she left these for us so we could be prepared. She even left instructions on what to do if symptoms appear. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. What kind of instructions? Medical contacts, warning signs, and precautions. She believed that isolation helped. That when someone started showing symptoms, keeping them away from others until they were stable was the safest option. The word isolation made my stomach twist. I thought about the broken kitchen, the anger I couldn't explain, the restless nights. "Ellie, I think it's already happening," I whispered. She reached out, placing a steady hand on mine. "We'll get through this. Together." But as I looked into her eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that the madness was a force bigger than either of us, and that the family's secrets were only the beginning of a long night I couldn't wake from. I woke up that morning with my head pounding and a dry mouth, like I hadn't slept at all. The files. The endless cascade of names and diagnoses. The pictures of my grandmother, younger, eyes dull but desperate in the psychiatric reports. The way the doctors wrote about episodes and violent tendencies, the hushed clinical tone that didn't quite mask the horror beneath their words. I had been trying to convince myself I was overreacting, that the signs I was seeing in myself were coincidence, stress, or exhaustion. But there was no denying it anymore. I sat up and reached for the notebook I'd been keeping since the attic discovery. The pages were filled with notes, observations, and everything I'd uncovered about the disorder, something called familial aggressive psychosis, or FAP, a rare and devastating condition that had been documented in scattered medical journals but never publicly acknowledged by my family. It was hereditary, progressive, and incurable. The files traced its path through our bloodline for at least 4 generations. My hands trembled as I reread the last entry I'd made the night before, had a nightmare about Grandma. She was screaming, but no sound came out. Woke up with scratches on my arms. No explanation. Still can't explain the bruises on my left leg. I glanced down. The bruises were still there, faint but undeniable. I had no memory of falling or bumping into anything. My mind raced, and I tried to push the dark thoughts away. I forced myself out of bed and into the shower, hoping the hot water would wash away the anxiety. Instead, it only made my skin crawl. Every noise in the house seemed amplified, the creak of the floorboards, the drip of the faucet settling into silence. I pulled back the shower curtain to check the bathroom mirror. For a moment, I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. Pale, eyes rimmed red, hair tousled. There was something wild in my gaze that unsettled me. I dressed quickly and made my way to the kitchen, where the coffee pot gurgled softly. The morning light was weak, filtered through the rain-soaked windows. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I jumped. 3 missed calls from my cousin Mark. That was odd. He never called me out of the blue. I dialed back with shaky fingers. "Hey," Mark answered, voice cautious. I heard from Aunt June about the files you found." I swallowed hard. "Yeah, I'm still going through them." There was a pause on the other end. "I think you need to be careful, Jamie. We've all known about the family history for years, but it's not something you want to dig into. Especially not alone. You don't know what you're dealing with." "I'm not scared," I said, though my voice betrayed me. "I just want to understand." Mark sighed. "I get it. But Grandma went through hell. And some of the others, well, you saw the reports. It's not just paranoia or stress. It's real, and it's dangerous." I clenched the phone tighter. "I'm starting to feel it, Mark. The headaches, the mood swings. I'm scared I'm next." "Then don't be alone," he said firmly. "Promise me you'll come visit. We can talk more in person. You don't have to face this by yourself." I agreed, though a knot tightened in my stomach. Going to Mark's felt like admitting defeat, like stepping further into the darkness I was trying to escape. After the call, I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept slipping. Faces from the files haunted me: great-uncle Robert, the one who had attacked his wife, my grandfather, who had disappeared for months before being found wandering the streets, incoherent and violent. Their stories were no longer just history, They felt like warnings stamped in blood. Later that afternoon, I took the dog for a walk despite the rain. The gray skies mirrored my mood, and I kept my head down, trying not to think. But then I noticed something strange. There were scratches on the tree trunks lining the path, deep, jagged marks that looked fresh. They weren't from animals, I was sure of that. They almost looked like someone had been clawing at the bark, desperate or angry. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine and quicken my pace. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening to the storm outside and the quiet creaks of the house settling. My thoughts spiraled, and the shadows in the room seemed to press closer. I tried to anchor myself to reality by writing in my notebook, but the words blurred together as my hands shook. Then I heard it, a faint tapping at the window. I sat up sharply, heart pounding. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate. I switched on the bedside lamp and stared at the window. Nothing but rain and darkness. I convinced myself it was a branch blown by the wind, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me. The next morning, I found a note slipped under the door. It was folded carefully, written in a hand strikingly familiar, my grandmother's. Do not trust your mind. Fight it. The message chilled me. How could it be from her? She was dead. I checked the rest of the house, but no one was there. No sign of forced entry or strangers. I felt trapped between fear and disbelief, the boundary between reality and paranoia blurring. I realized that the real threat wasn't some unknown force, it was the disease. The disorder that had claimed my ancestors, and was now clawing its way into me. I was not just uncovering family secrets anymore. I was living them. And the clock was ticking. Story 5, Silent Intruder, Terror Inside the Home. It was just past midnight when I first heard it, the faint but unmistakable sound of my front door unlocking from the inside. I lay perfectly still, straining my ears, my breath shallow. The sound came again, a subtle scrape of metal sliding back in the lock. It was faint, but it wasn't the house. It was someone, somewhere inside my home, undoing the lock from the inside. How was that possible? My mind raced through every scenario. Had I somehow locked the door from the outside but left the door unlocked from the inside? I doubted it. I always locked it from inside first, then deadbolt from outside when I left. I never left the door unlocked. Could a locksmith have come earlier in the day, and I simply forgot? No, I would remember that. I was meticulous about my security. I reached over to the nightstand and grabbed my phone, not turning on the flashlight on purpose. The room was pitch black except for the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing, and tapped 911. Before I could explain, I heard the floorboard creak from the hallway outside my bedroom door. My blood turned cold. Someone was definitely inside. I whispered into the phone, "I think someone's in my house," and the operator's calm voice came through the speaker, telling me to stay calm and that help was on the way. I didn't want to hang up but didn't want to make noise either. The creaking came again, closer this time, footsteps slow and deliberate. Whoever it was wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. They were moving with purpose, like they knew exactly where they were going. I pulled the blanket over my head, trying to make myself invisible. My mind flashed back to every true crime story I'd ever heard, every warning about not confronting an intruder. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't prepared for this. All I could do was wait. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. Then the knob turned slowly. I held my breath. The door opened a crack. I caught a glimpse of a shadow, a figure standing there, the dim light from the hallway silhouetting them. They weren't wearing a mask. Just a dark hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. No face covering. My heart hammered so hard I thought they'd hear it. They stepped inside, scanning the room, their eyes landing on me beneath the blanket. I was caught. The figure moved closer, and I realized I wasn't screaming because my voice had been stolen by fear. I wanted to run, but my body was frozen. Suddenly, the phone was ripped from my hand. A gruff whisper filled the room, "Don't call the cops again." The operator's voice went silent. I knew then that this wasn't a random break-in. They'd been watching me for a while, waiting for the perfect moment. And now, they were inside, watching. The dim light from the street lamp outside barely cut through the shadows, but I could make out the shape of the intruder looming over me. His breath was heavy, ragged an animal's breath, and his eyes glinted with a cold, cruel amusement. "Who are you?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "That's not important right now. What matters is that you stay quiet. No more calls, no more alarms. Understand?" I nodded, even though my mind screamed for me to do the opposite. He crouched down to my level, his face inches from mine. The stench of sweat and something metallic filled my nostrils. "You're lucky I'm not here to hurt you," he said, voice low. "For now." His hand tightened around my wrist, cold and unyielding. I felt a flicker of pain, but I didn't dare move. He pulled me upright, forcing me onto my feet. My heart pounded wildly, threatening to betray me. "Come with me," he ordered. There was no choice. My limbs obeyed out of pure survival instinct. As I followed him through the darkened hallway, the numbness in my fingers faded, replaced by a sickening realization. The front door was locked behind me, the sound of the click echoing ominously in the silence. We moved quickly, silently. He guided me down the stairs, away from the main rooms, into the basement. The air grew colder, damp, and smelled of mold and rust. My eyes adjusted. The faint glow from a single, bare bulb revealed a cluttered space filled with old furniture covered in sheets and boxes piled high. He stopped near a narrow door at the back, a rusty padlock securing it. "Sit," he commanded, nodding at a rickety wooden chair. I did as I was told, every muscle taut with tension. He produced a knife from his jacket, small, sharp, and ran the blade along the edge of the padlock, snapping it open with a practiced twist. He pushed the door open, revealing a dark room beyond. "Stay here," he said, voice softer this time. "If you make a sound, I'll know." I swallowed hard, nodding again. The door creaked shut, leaving me alone in the basement's gloom. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time lost meaning. I strained my ears for any hint of movement, any clue to what was happening beyond the door. Suddenly, the faintest sound, a soft thud, then a scrape. Panic surged. Was he searching for something? For someone? A cold breeze swept through the basement as the door cracked open again. The intruder's silhouette appeared, this time carrying a small box. He placed it on the floor beside me. "Open it." My hands trembled, but I lifted the lid. Inside lay a phone, older model, unfamiliar, but functional. Alongside it, a note scrawled hastily. "Use this only if you want to live." Confused, I looked up. He smirked, the cruel twist of his lips sending a shiver down my spine. "This is the only lifeline you have now. The one you destroyed is gone for good." My mind raced. Was this a trap, or a twisted form of mercy? Before I could respond, he turned and disappeared, the door slamming shut behind him. Alone again, I clutched the phone, the weight of my predicament settling like a stone in my chest. I powered it on, the screen flickered to life, showing a single contact, "Help." My finger hovered hesitantly over the call button. Could this be my chance? Or just another cruel joke? Taking a deep breath, I pressed it. A voice answered immediately. The floorboard creaked again, louder this time, closer. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white, and slowly moved my gaze toward the bedroom door. The dim light from the hallway spilled through the crack beneath it, but that was all I could see. The second time the floorboard creaked, I managed to catch a shadow, a faint silhouette shifting just beyond the door. Someone was standing there, just out of sight. Watching. Waiting. The operator asked again, her voice softer now. "Are you safe? Can you lock your bedroom door?" I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. The door was unlocked. I'd never locked it. Not at night. Not even when I'd heard the first noise. Locking it would mean making noise, and noise might give away my position. I whispered as quietly as I could, "There's someone in my house." She told me to stay calm, stay quiet, and keep the line open. Her voice was steady, but I could tell from the background noise that the police were mobilizing. I didn't know how quickly they could get here, but every second felt like an hour. The creaking stopped. For a moment, it was silent except for the faint buzz of the phone and my shallow breathing. Then, the door handle turned slowly, like a tortoise inching forward. The knob rattled lightly. I froze. The door eased open a few inches, revealing a sliver of the hallway bathed in moonlight. I could see the intruder's face now, or rather, half of it. A young man, maybe late 20s, with dark hair plastered to his forehead. His eyes caught the light and flicked over me quickly, wide and wild, like he was sizing me up. He paused, then stepped in. The door opened wider, but he didn't come all the way inside. Instead, he leaned against the frame, one hand gripping the edge like a lifeline. I swallowed hard and shook my head. "Why are you here?" My voice was barely audible, but it was the only thing I could think to say. He didn't answer. Instead, he smiled, a thin, forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to scare you." I didn't believe him. I had no reason to. My mind spun as I tried to process what was happening. Who was he? How had he gotten inside? And most importantly, what did he want? "Get out," I said, louder this time, my voice steady despite the fear. "I'm calling the police." He blinked, then took a step back. "Look, I'm not here to hurt you. I needed to talk." I shook my head. "No. You don't belong here. Leave." He hesitated, looking down at the floor. Then, as if making up his mind, he stepped fully inside and closed the door softly behind him. The lock clicked. Locked. Panic surged through me. He was inside, and now the door was locked. I was trapped. "Please," he said, voice low. "I don't want to cause trouble. I just need a moment." I kept my phone pressed to my ear, fingers trembling. The operator whispered again, "Help is on the way. Stay on the line with me." The man paced slowly toward the living room. "I'm sorry I had to come like this. I tried calling. I tried texting. You never answered." I frowned. "Who are you?" He stopped and looked at me fully for the first time. His face was tired, drawn, but there was something familiar in his eyes. "Jason," he said. "We met a few times at the coffee shop down the street." The coffee shop. The one I went to every morning on my way to work. I thought back, trying to remember. I didn't recall his face, but I'd probably seen him. People came and went all the time. "Jason," I repeated cautiously. "Why are you in my house?" He sighed and sank into the couch, rubbing his hands over his face. I'm sorry for breaking in. I'm desperate. I lost my job, my apartment. I didn't know where else to go. I stared at him, torn between fear and a strange flicker of sympathy. Desperation didn't justify breaking into someone's home, but the story sounded genuine. Why didn't you go to a shelter? I asked softly. He looked at me, eyes pleading. They're full. I've been sleeping on the streets for weeks. I was cold. I was hungry. I just wanted a safe place to stay for a night. I took a deep breath, trying to keep control. Part of me wanted to call the police immediately, but another part hesitated. Maybe he really was just a guy who made a terrible mistake. I had to think fast. The operator said, "Officers are outside your house now. Can you see them?" I moved quietly toward the window and peeked through the blinds. Flashing red and blue lights bathed the lawn. Relief flooded me. Help was here. I turned back to Jason. "The police are here. They'll want to talk to you." He nodded slowly and stood up. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." The front door opened suddenly, and 2 officers stepped inside, their hands on their holsters. "Ma'am, are you okay?" one asked as they scanned the room. "Yes," I said, voice still shaky. "He's the one who broke in." The officers moved to Jason and gently but firmly placed him in handcuffs. He didn't resist. As they let him out, I felt an overwhelming mix of relief and unease. I was safe now, but how had I missed the signs? How had someone been inside my home without me noticing? Back in my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, the adrenaline finally fading. My phone was still in my hand, the operator's voice thanking me for staying calm now distant. I realized the whole ordeal had been over within minutes, but the fear would linger for a long time. I glanced around my room, every shadow suddenly feeling like a threat. But I was alone again. Or was I? I shook the thought away. No, it was over. For now. But something told me this wasn't the last time I'd see Jason or any stranger lurking in the dark corners of my life. The line to 911 was ringing. Panic clawed at my throat, but I forced myself to breathe. The operator answered. I barely whispered, "Someone's inside my house. Please, hurry." She asked my address, and I gave it in a voice steadier than I felt. The door handle stopped turning. I waited, every muscle tense, listening. Then the handle turned the rest of the way. The door swung open slowly, and the hallway light flicked on, blinding me. Standing in the doorway was a man. He wasn't masked, wasn't wearing anything to disguise himself. Just a tired-looking guy, maybe late 30s, with rumpled clothes and a scruffy beard. His eyes were wide, but not in fear, more like he was trying to seem innocent, or maybe confused. "Hey," he said quietly, raising his hands a little. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you." I was frozen, phone still pressed to my ear. The operator was silent on the other end, probably trying to listen. "Who are you?" I asked, voice trembling. "My name's Mark," he said. "I don't want trouble. I thought this was my place." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "This is my house." "You're trespassing." He looked down at the floor, then back at me. "Look, I'm sorry. I was homeless, and I saw this place with the door unlocked earlier tonight. I thought maybe I could stay a bit, just to rest." My head spun. How could he have thought that? I had locked the door when I left, I was sure of it. "Why didn't you just knock or call?" I asked, still gripping the phone. He shrugged. I didn't have a phone. I was scared. I didn't know how else to get in. Honestly, I just wanted to sleep somewhere safe. I looked at him, trying to assess if he was telling the truth or if this was some kind of trick. Have you been in the house long? I asked. Mark hesitated, then said, Not long. I got in through the back door. It was open. The back door. I hadn't thought to check it. I'm calling the police, I said firmly, and Mark nodded, stepping back toward the hallway. Wait. My voice caught on a sob. Don't move. He froze. I took a deep breath and hung up, then locked my bedroom door, sliding the bolt into place. I leaned against it, sliding down to the floor. The sound of sirens was faint but growing closer. Minutes later, 2 officers were inside, flashlight beams cutting across my living room. They spoke with Mark, who cooperated fully. The officers told me he had a record for petty theft and trespassing, but said this time he seemed more desperate than dangerous. One officer stayed with me while the other escorted Mark out. I watched as they took him down the street and into a patrol car, the flashing lights painting everything in red and blue. The officer sitting with me checked my locks again, then handed me a card. If it happens again, call us immediately. Don't try to confront anyone yourself. I nodded, voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. That night, I sat awake on my couch, the front door locked and bolted, every window latched tight. The image of Mark's wide eyes haunted me, and the quietness of my home felt different, less safe, more fragile. I kept wondering, how long had he been inside? How many times had he watched me without my knowing? And what if next time, it wasn't a desperate man looking for shelter, but someone with darker intentions? I didn't sleep. The hours stretched on, each creak of the old house amplified in the stifling silence. My mind refused to settle, replaying every moment with Mark, the tremble in his voice, the way his hands shook as he gripped the doorframe. Was it fear? Desperation? Or something else lurking beneath that raw edge? By dawn, exhaustion tugged at me, but the unease lingered like a shadow. I stared out the window, watching the pale light seep over the rooftops, reluctant to believe the world outside had returned to normal. My sanctuary felt violated, an invisible line crossed. I realized then that safety wasn't a guarantee, it was fragile, and often just an illusion we tell ourselves. Coffee in hand, I debated whether to call someone, police, a friend, anyone, but the thought of explaining, of recounting the encounter, made my throat tighten. Mark hadn't threatened me. In fact, he seemed broken, lost. Yet, the vulnerability of the situation unsettled me deeply. I decided instead to check the locks again, then the windows, running my fingers over each latch, imagining how easily they could be forced or overlooked. The house, once a haven, felt like a labyrinth of potential entry points for fear. I thought about the times I'd left doors unlocked, assuming no one would take interest in my quiet life. Later that morning, a knock at the door jolted me. My heart leapt into my throat. Peering through the peephole, I saw a mail carrier holding a small package. Relief washed over me. I opened it carefully, a book I'd ordered weeks ago, and traced my fingers over the worn leather cover, grounding myself in something tangible. But even as I tucked the book under my arm, a question gnawed at me. What had Mark's story been? Why had he come here? And most hauntingly, what would happen if I ever saw those eyes again? The fragile veil of safety had been lifted, and nothing felt quite the same. The phone call to 911 had barely ended when I heard it again, the slow, deliberate scraping of the deadbolt sliding back into the lock position inside the door. I pressed my back flat against the bedroom door, my heart hammering in my chest. The hallway was dark, but I could make out the faint outline of the doorframe. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was frozen in place. I was trapped between panic and paralysis. The operator's voice crackled through the phone. "Sir? Are you there? Can you hear me?" I whispered, "Yes. Please hurry." There was a pause, then, "Help is on the way. Stay on the line." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every muscle in my body was tense, waiting, listening. The house was deathly silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. But then, there it was, a soft shuffle sound from the hallway, like someone moving slowly, deliberately, feet barely making a sound on the carpet. I swallowed hard and strained my eyes, but the darkness swallowed everything beyond the bedroom door. Whoever it was knew the house well. They weren't a random intruder crashing through windows or kicking down doors. This was calculated, methodical. My mind flashed back to the day before, when I noticed the mail had been sitting untouched on the porch, the newspapers stacking up by the front steps. I told myself it was just a lazy delivery guy, but now I realized that someone had timed my absence. Watched me. Waited for the right moment. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. The sound came again, the slow scrape of the deadbolt being undone. Then the faint creak of the door handle moving. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had to think fast. I couldn't just wait for the police to get here while someone prowled my home. I scanned the room, looking for anything that could serve as a weapon. My eyes landed on the heavy metal lamp on the dresser. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing. I moved silently across the room, grabbing it and holding it tight. The bedroom door handle rattled slightly. Whoever was out there was testing it, trying to gauge my reaction. Then, quiet again. I crouched low and edged toward the corner where the adjoining wall met the hallway. From here, I could see the faint sliver of light from under the front door at the end of the hallway. I could hear the footsteps again, this time, softer, more deliberate. My mind raced. Could I lock myself in my closet? It was a small space, but it might buy me more time. Or maybe run through the back door. No, if someone was already inside, they could be anywhere. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. Then the soft scrape of metal again, the deadbolt sliding back into the locked position. I exhaled, barely able to believe it. Whoever it was had locked the door behind them. That meant they were planning to stay a while. My phone vibrated softly in my hand. The operator's voice was calm but urgent. "Sir, are you safe? Officers are about 5 minutes out." 5 minutes felt like an eternity. Suddenly, the hallway light flickered on just outside my door. I froze. The silhouette of a man appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, leaning slowly into the light. There was no mask, no disguise, just a calm, cold stare. The man smiled slowly. "I know you're in there," he said softly. My throat went dry. "Don't make this hard," he continued. "I don't want to hurt you." I gripped the lamp tighter. What do you want?" "Just to talk," he said. "You probably don't remember me, but I know you. I know your routine, your habits. I've been watching for weeks." My body shook. I tried to think, who could this be? Someone from work? A neighbor? A stranger? The man took a step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "Why?" I whispered. "Because you have something I want," he said. "And I'm going to get it, one way or another." My mind reeled. I didn't know what he meant. I didn't have anything valuable. No money. No secrets that I knew of. Just a quiet life. The front door slammed shut down the hall. "Police are here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The man's smile faded. "For now," he said, stepping back into the shadows. "We'll finish this later." Then he was gone. I dropped to the floor, tears streaming down my face as the sound of sirens grew louder outside. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. I stayed huddled on the floor, my heart pounding in my chest as the flashing blue and red lights painted the walls. The doorbell rang again, more urgent this time, followed by heavy footsteps. I wiped my face with shaking hands, trying to compose myself before opening the door. 2 officers stood there, their eyes scanning the dim hallway behind them as if expecting someone to bolt out from the shadows. "Are you okay?" one asked gently. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I think so. There was someone here. He said this wasn't over." The officer's jaw tightened. "Did you get a good look at him?" I shook my head. "No. Just his smile." It was like he knew something I didn't. Behind them, the night pressed against the windows, thick with secrets. I realized then that whatever this was, it wasn't random. It was personal. And it was coming for me again. The seconds stretched out, dragging themselves across the room like the heavy fog that had settled over my chest. The 911 operator's voice was a faint comfort, a lifeline in the darkness. "Please stay on the line. Officers are on their way. Can you tell me where you are in the house?" I swallowed. "In my bedroom, upstairs." "Someone's in my house." More silence. Then the creak again, this time accompanied by the whisper of fabric brushing against the floor. My eyes darted toward the door, but the heavy oak framed in shadow gave away nothing. My heart hammered so loudly I feared it might betray me. The operator's voice snapped me back. "Can you lock your bedroom door?" I shook my head, even though no one could see me. "No. It's open. I didn't close it when I went to bed." "Okay, stay quiet. Are there any weapons nearby?" There was the baseball bat in the closet, but getting to it meant crossing the hall. Crossing into the open. I clenched my jaw. "No," I said quietly. "Nothing." I could hear my own ragged breathing now, the only sound besides the soft footsteps moving down the hall. They were deliberate, slow, cautious. Someone was inside my house, watching me, waiting for a moment to strike. The weight of that realization hit me harder than any physical blow could. Then, suddenly, the creaking stopped. The hallway was silent. "Is he still there?" the operator asked. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Yes." The silence stretched, then I heard it, the faintest whisper of a key turning in the front door's deadbolt. But that couldn't be right. The door was locked from the inside. Had the intruder gone back downstairs? Or was there someone else? My mind spun in panic, but then I realized the truth. The front door was unlocking from the inside. Someone had been inside my house all along, watching me, quietly moving through the shadows. The front door unlocking meant they planned to leave, but they were making sure I was still trapped upstairs. I swallowed hard, fighting back the urge to scream or bolt. I had to think. I had to act. "Where are the officers?" I whispered into the phone. "They're close. Please stay calm." I closed my eyes and counted to 10, forcing my racing heart to slow. Then I heard it again, the creak of the door handle turning on the bedroom door. I tensed, readying myself for whatever was coming. The bedroom door opened an inch. A shadow slipped inside. I lunged, grabbing the intruder's arm and twisting hard. A crunch shattered the silence as the figure stumbled, caught off guard. I yanked him into the room and slammed the door shut behind us, pressing my back against it. Who the hell are you? I demanded, voice shaking. He was young, maybe mid-20s, eyes wild and desperate. Please, don't hurt me, he hissed. I'm not here to kill you. Then what? I asked, breath ragged. He swallowed hard. I needed help. I thought you were someone else. The tension didn't ease. What do you mean, someone else? He looked around nervously. I followed you home. I thought you were my sister's roommate. I wanted to talk. It got out of hand. I stared at him, disbelief and fear warring inside me. You broke into my house. You've been in here for hours. He nodded miserably. Look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. The sirens wailed faintly outside. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by the knowledge that this stranger had been inside my home, watching, waiting. The police would arrive any second, but I would never feel safe here again. The front door remained unlocked, a silent reminder that the nightmare wasn't over. The man shifted uneasily, his eyes darting toward the windows as if expecting the shadows themselves to give him away. I wasn't here to hurt you, he murmured. I didn't know where else to go. His voice was raw, edged with something like desperation, but I couldn't let my guard down. Why my house? Why break in like this? He swallowed hard, then sighed. I needed a place to hide. I'm in trouble, not with the police, but with people who won't stop until they find me. I thought maybe if I stayed here, it would buy me some time. Time. The word echoed in my mind as the distant flashing lights grew closer, painting harsh red and blue streaks against the walls. I glanced at the clock. 10 minutes at most before they'd be inside. Who are they? I pressed, voice trembling slightly. He looked away, the weight of his secret pressing down on him. I can't say. Not yet. But if they catch me, it won't just be me in danger. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. My simple, quiet life had just fractured, splintered by this sudden intrusion. Yet, as much as I wanted him gone, I also felt that strange, inexplicable pull, the urge to help, to understand. The wail of sirens crescendoed, and the doorbell rang sharply. They're here, I whispered, reluctantly reaching for my phone. He nodded once, sharply. Be careful, he said before slipping back into the shadows near the staircase. As I opened the door to the officers, I realized that whatever happened next, nothing would be the same. The night had shifted, a hidden story unfolding within these walls, and I was right in the middle of it. Story 6, Silent Ward Secrets, Unearthing Forbidden Experiments. The air inside the asylum was thick with dust and the lingering scent of mildew, the kind that settles deep into fabric and wood, stubborn even after years of neglect. I had come looking for patient records. Not the usual case files stored neatly and catalogued. No, I was after something more elusive. According to the faded newspaper clippings I'd collected over months, the asylum had once been home to a doctor who operated quietly at the edge of legality, Dr. Harold Garrison. There were hints that Garrison conducted unauthorized experiments on patients, some so secretive that when the asylum closed down in the early 70s, his files had vanished without a trace. The idea of unearthing those records had consumed me. Where there was a doctor who flouted rules and ethics, there had to be evidence. And if those experiments had been as brutal or twisted as the rumors claimed, the world needed to know. I adjusted the strap of my backpack and pulled my flashlight from inside. The beam cut through the dimness, illuminating peeling wallpaper and stained linoleum floors cracked with age. Faded signs hung crookedly on the walls, some warning of restricted areas or cautioning staff, others simply pointing toward wards long abandoned. I moved cautiously, boots echoing softly in the cavernous space. My breath came out in quiet puffs, clouding in the cold air. The asylum wasn't empty. I could feel it, not ghosts or spirits, but something else. The heavy silence was unsettling, as if I was intruding on a place still alive with watchful eyes. I had made contact with a former employee, one who claimed to have insider knowledge. She warned me to be careful, not just of the building's physical dangers, but of the people who still kept tabs on those poking around old wounds. Illegal experiments weren't just stories to some, they were liabilities. And someone, somewhere, wanted to keep them buried. I didn't flinch at the thought, though. I'd spent too many nights chasing leads, reading dry transcripts and old court documents. I wasn't about to let a little intimidation stop me. Deeper inside the building, I found what remained of the administrative wing. The door to the records room was ajar, its rusted hinges groaning as I pushed it open. The room was a mess. Filing cabinets lay toppled, papers scattered across the floor in faded piles, their edges brittle and yellowed. I dropped to my knees and started sifting through them. Minutes later, I uncovered a manila folder stamped with Garrison, Confidential. My heart quickened. The folder was thick, packed with handwritten notes, patient charts, and lab reports that made my skin crawl. Dosages of experimental drugs, descriptions of procedures that looked more like torture than treatment, references to patients who'd disappeared or been transferred with no official record. I scanned one report where a patient's vitals were monitored through a series of invasive procedures. The doctor's notes were clinical but chilling. Subject exhibits signs of acute distress. Continuation of trial advised for further data. I felt a prickling at the back of my neck. Someone was watching me. I stood up quickly, shoving the folder into my backpack. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly from somewhere down the hall. I froze, listening. The footsteps stopped. I told myself it was just another explorer or a maintenance worker. But my gut twisted. I'd never felt so exposed in a place that was supposed to be empty. I slipped out of the records room and moved toward a side exit I'd spotted earlier. The hallway stretched ahead, dim and narrow. When I reached the end, I found the door locked. Of course it was locked. I pulled out my phone to check the time. No signal. That was expected. I tried the door again. Still locked. Behind me, I heard a soft click like the sound of a lock disengaging. I spun around. No one was there. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I wasn't imagining it. Someone had been inside the building, close enough to watch and wait. I needed to get out. I retraced my steps, the flashlight beam jittering as my hands shook. I reached the main hall again and scanned the entranceway. The front door was open now. I was sure I'd closed it before I came in. Outside, the evening sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the cracked pavement. I stepped out quickly, glancing over my shoulder. The street was empty, but I could feel eyes on me. I walked briskly back to my car, parked a few blocks away, tires crunching on gravel. I fumbled with the keys, heart pounding. Finally, I got the door open and slid inside. Hands trembling, I dug the folder out of my backpack. The weight of the documents inside pressed down like a stone. As I started the engine, I heard a soft tapping on my windshield. I jerked my head up. Nothing. Just a leaf, blown by the wind. I exhaled and backed out slowly, driving away from the asylum and the shadows it hid. But I knew this wasn't over. Whoever had been watching me inside the asylum wasn't just curious. They wanted to make sure I didn't dig too deep. And now, they knew I was onto them. The streetlights flickered as the night thickened, and I felt eyes following every turn. I stepped cautiously down the crumbling hallway, The weak beam of my flashlight tracing jagged shadows where plaster had fallen away to reveal rusted pipes and bare brick. My heart thudded harder when I noticed a door at the far end of the corridor. It was different from the others, a heavy steel frame with a reinforced glass window, smeared with grime but still intact. A faded label read Records Archive, authorized personnel only. I guessed that was exactly where I wanted to be. The lock was old but stubborn, the kind you could coax open with a bit of patience and a thin blade. I pulled a small lockpick from my jacket pocket, a gift from a friend who had a knack for this kind of thing, and set to work. Minutes passed in tense silence, my fingers fumbling against the tumblers, until there was a faint click, and the door eased open with a grating protest. Inside, the room was a tomb. Rows of rusted metal filing cabinets lined the walls, their labels yellowed and curling. Dust motes floated in the beam of my flashlight, settling thickly on everything. I pulled on a pair of latex gloves I had brought, not that I expected anything sterile, but better than touching whatever had been rotting here for decades. I started rifling through the cabinets, flipping through folders labeled with patient names and dates from the 1950s and 60s. Most were standard case notes, diagnoses, treatment plans, progress reports. But then, in a drawer near the back marked Garrison Confidential, I found something different. The files were smaller, hastily torn from notepads, some sealed with red wax stamps I didn't recognize. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. I unfolded one and scanned the contents, my breath catching as I read. The documents detailed experimental treatments on patients with schizophrenia and other severe mental illnesses. But these weren't the standard electroshock therapies or drug trials the era was known for. These notes described invasive procedures, attempts to alter brain chemistry through injected compounds, surgical interventions without anesthesia, and chillingly, the use of what looked like electrochemical devices attached directly to the brain's cortex. Worse, many entries recorded patients who never recovered or disappeared from official records altogether. The tone was clinical, detached, but behind it lay something brutal: patients reduced to test subjects, stripped of rights, subjected to cruel procedures in the name of progress. I snapped photos of the files with my phone, careful to keep the flash off. The building's decrepit wiring probably couldn't handle much, and I didn't want to attract any unwanted attention. As I continued to dig through the files, a low noise echoed from the hallway, a soft but deliberate sound, like footsteps. I froze and listened. The sound stopped almost immediately. Maybe it was just the building settling again, or a rat skittering in the walls. Still, my senses were on edge. Whoever or whatever was here wasn't going to put up with an intruder. I slipped the folders into my backpack and moved toward the door. As I reached for the handle, there was a faint creak behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam darting across the room, but saw nothing except the decaying shelves and scattered debris. I forced myself to stay calm and slipped out of the archive, closing the door quietly behind me. The hallway stretched empty and silent once more. But the feeling that I was being watched crawled under my skin. I quickened my pace, making my way toward the next section I had planned to explore, the old records room in the administrative wing, where I hoped to find more concrete proof and maybe a name or two of collaborators. Halfway there, I heard the unmistakable crunch of gravel under boots outside the building. I ducked behind a broken wall panel, heart pounding. From my vantage point, I could see through a shattered window someone was pacing just beyond the front entrance, tall, dressed in dark clothing, face obscured by a cap pulled low. They didn't look like a casual explorer. The way they moved was too deliberate, almost predatory. I held my breath, every nerve screaming at me to run, but I knew that would only draw attention. Instead, I pressed myself flat against the wall and waited. The figure scanned the perimeter slowly, then reached into a pocket and pulled out something that glinted in the weak light, a small flashlight, maybe, or a weapon. The thought sent a chill down my spine. Whoever this was, they were not here to admire the building's decay. They were a guardian of secrets, likely the same person who had been watching visitors and silencing those who got too close, as whispered in the rumors. I had no choice but to retreat. Carefully, I backed away from the window, mindful not to make a sound. I needed to get out of the asylum, regroup, and figure out what I was dealing with before pressing any further. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, and the building loomed behind me like a dark sentinel. The scattered light from my flashlight danced across the twisted iron gates, now chained and padlocked, but clearly breached at points. I pulled my coat tighter and looked back one last time. The figure was gone. But the message was clear. Someone was watching, and they weren't going to let me uncover the truth. As I walked away from the asylum down the cracked pavement toward my car, the weight of what I'd found pressed down on me. This wasn't just an abandoned building with a sordid past, it was a carefully guarded tomb. And I had just cracked it open. The morning after my discovery in the basement, I woke with a heavy tension settling in my chest. I had spent hours poring over the patient files I'd found, a thick binder of loose-leaf paper shoved behind a false panel in what looked like an old supply closet. The records were fragmentary, smudged with age and water damage, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Dr. Harold Garrison. His name appeared everywhere, in notes that detailed experimental treatments on unwilling patients, electroconvulsive therapies pushed far beyond accepted limits, strange chemical trials, and references to augmentation protocols that made no sense without his personal notes. There was also a name I kept seeing, Dr. Ellis. The few mentions painted him as a shadow figure, someone who seemed to have overseen or at least assisted Garrison but kept out of the official records. He wasn't listed in any public documents relating to the asylum. My gut told me Ellis was important, maybe the key to understanding how deep the experiments went. I had planned to return the next day, better prepared with gloves, extra batteries, and a notepad. But before I could even leave my apartment, a message popped up on my phone from an unknown number. It was just one line: "Stop digging or you'll regret it." The message was brief, but the threat was clear. Whoever was watching me knew what I was after. The asylum's secrets were still protected by someone dangerous. I ignored it for now. Curiosity outweighed caution. There was no way I could walk away after uncovering what I had. The truth about Garrison, Ellis, and the patients trapped in that facility needed to come out. I reached the asylum just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The building looked even more sinister in the fading light, shadows pooling in every corner. I paused at the entrance, glancing around. No one was in sight. I slipped my backpack over my shoulder and headed straight for the basement entrance I'd found the day before. This time, I went slow, checking every corner and doorway as I descended. The air was stale but carried a faint metallic tang. Old blood, I supposed. I switched on my flashlight and scanned the walls. The false panel was gone. I tapped every inch of the closet walls, pressing my fingers into the rotted wood, until my knuckles hit something solid behind a loose board. My hands trembled as I pried it open and pulled out a small metal box, rusted but intact. Inside were notebooks, handwritten journals bound in leather, brittle with age. I flipped through the first pages and recognized Garrison's scrawling. The entries were chilling, describing experiments that crossed every ethical boundary: drug-induced psychosis, surgical alterations without anesthesia, forced sensory deprivation. One entry stood out. Garrison wrote about Phase 2 experiments, referring to a subject, patient 47, who had supposedly died during a procedure. But Garrison's notes suggested 47 had survived in some altered state, and Ellis was tasked with continuing observation. A sudden noise made me freeze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the floor above. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. The asylum was supposed to be empty. I stuffed the notebooks back into the box and slid it into my backpack, careful not to make a sound. I moved toward the stairs, flashlight off, hoping whoever was up there wouldn't notice me in the darkness. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the footsteps stopped. Silence stretched out so long I thought they might have left. Then, a whisper. "Why don't you just leave it alone?" The voice was low, gravelly, and unmistakably human. I couldn't place it, but it wasn't someone young. It sounded like it belonged to a man who'd spent too many years in shadows. I didn't answer. My breath caught in my throat as I edged back toward the stairs, ready to bolt. "Some things are better buried," the voice said again, nearer this time, just beyond the top step. Without thinking, I sprinted up, stumbling into the corridor. My flashlight flicked on, and I caught a glimpse of a man stepping back into the doorway of an office. He was lean, with sharp eyes and a thin scar running down one side of his face. His clothes were dusty and worn, like he'd been living here, or at least spending a lot of time. "Who are you?" I demanded, voice trembling. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Someone who's been watching you. You're poking your nose where it doesn't belong." I swallowed and took a step back. "I'm just trying to find the truth. About the patients, about Garrison." He shook his head. "Truth? You don't want the truth. There are things you don't understand, and the less you see, the better off you'll be." His gaze hardened, and I realized then I was dealing with someone who had personal stakes tied up in this place, someone who knew what Garrison did and was willing to protect those secrets at any cost. I thought about running, but my legs felt like lead. The man stepped forward, blocking the hallway. "Leave. Now. Before this gets ugly." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and backed away slowly toward the stairs. As I reached the bottom, I dared a glance back. He was still standing there, watching me go, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the office. Outside, the cold air hit me like a slap. I didn't stop running until I was several blocks away from the asylum, heart hammering, mind racing. Later that night, I sat in my apartment, notebook open, trying to piece everything together. If that man was protecting Garrison's secrets, then the asylum hadn't just been abandoned. It was a tomb for the truth, guarded by those who had something to lose. I had to be careful. I knew now I wasn't just uncovering history. I was stepping into a dangerous game, one where the players didn't want to be found. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Tomorrow, I'd go back better prepared, and ready for whatever waited in the shadows. By the time I worked my way back into the bowels of the asylum, the sun had long since dipped below the horizon. I had spent the last few hours retracing my steps through the main corridors and patient wings, the map I'd pieced together from old blueprints crumpled in my pocket. The floor beneath me was littered with broken tiles and shards of glass, and the stale air was thick with dust and the faint, metallic smell of rusted metal. Somewhere deeper in this maze of concrete and peeling paint, I was convinced, were the hidden records of Dr. Garrison's experiments, documents so secret their existence had been erased from official archives. My heart pounded when I spotted the narrow stairwell that had eluded me before, tucked behind a false wall in the east wing. The plaster was cracked around the edges, but the hinges on the door were intact, though stiff with rust. I took a deep breath and pushed it open. The stairs descended steeply into darkness, the faint smell of damp earth and mold drifting up to meet me. I let my flashlight sweep the steps as I moved downward, each footfall careful and deliberate so as not to attract attention. At the bottom, I found myself in a small, windowless corridor far removed from the main asylum wings above. The walls were lined with what looked like storage closets or filing rooms, their heavy metal doors shut fast. The air was colder here, mustier, and I realized the sound of my breathing was amplified unnaturally. I kept my flashlight steady, flicking it across the doors. Most were locked or jammed, but one door hung slightly ajar, its lock rusted through. I slid inside. The room was packed floor to ceiling with old filing cabinets, and some overturned cardboard boxes spilled brittle manila folders onto the floor. I dropped my pack and started rifling through the nearest cabinet. Most of the files were patient charts, names, dates, diagnoses, notes from overworked nurses. I scanned through a few, feeling a chill as I read about electroconvulsive therapy sessions and lobotomies, but there was nothing out of the ordinary here. At least, not yet. Deeper into the room, beneath a layer of dust and grime, I came upon a locked metal box. The latch was old but intact. I pried at it with a screwdriver I kept in my pack for emergencies. After several minutes of prying and jiggling, the latch finally gave way, and I opened the box with a scrape that echoed unnervingly in the small chamber. Inside were several folders with brittle edges, labeled simply, Garrison Confidential. My pulse quickened. These were it. Patient files, notes, and what looked like handwritten journals. I flipped through the first folder carefully, experimental protocols, chemical compounds, detailed descriptions of procedures that went far beyond accepted medical practice. Garrison hadn't just been experimenting on medication dosages, he'd been testing unproven drugs and administering treatments without consent. Worse, some notes referenced controlled subjects and data extraction, phrases that made my stomach twist. Suddenly, I heard a noise, a sharp sound just outside the door. I froze. Footsteps, slow and measured. Someone was coming. I slammed the box shut and ducked behind a filing cabinet, heart hammering in my ears. The footsteps paused just outside the room. I held my breath, clutching my flashlight so tightly the knuckles whitened. The doorknob rattled lightly. Then silence. I waited for what felt like an eternity before I dared to peek out. The hallway was empty. I slipped out cautiously, closing the door behind me as quietly as possible. My mind raced. Someone else was here. Someone watching. I retraced my steps back up the stairwell, trying to stay in the shadows. The building seemed alive with unseen eyes, and every noise set my nerves on edge. As I neared the main floor, I heard voices, low, urgent, hushed but close. I ducked behind a crumbling pillar and listened. "Didn't expect anyone tonight," said a rough voice. "Probably nosy idiots like the last one. They got lucky before. Not this time. We're not leaving anything behind. Not again." My heart dropped. They knew I was here. They've been watching visitors, maybe more than just me. I realized then that the rumors weren't just local paranoia or urban legends. Someone was guarding these secrets, likely willing to silence anyone who got too close. I stayed hidden until the voices faded. The footsteps receded, and the asylum fell silent again, but now the fear was different. It wasn't just about what I might find, it was about who was watching, and what they might do if I didn't stop. I left the building that night with the box of files tucked safely in my pack, but I knew I couldn't go back, not without help, and not without a plan. The rogue doctor's shadow lingered here, but there was a darker presence now. Not ghosts or hallucinations, just men who wanted to bury the past forever. Back in my car, I locked the doors and sat for a long time, staring at the dark outline of the asylum against the night sky. The files were proof of atrocities, but they were also a beacon, and I was no longer just an outsider looking in. I was a target. I had to decide quickly, expose the truth, or disappear before they came for me again. I pushed open the heavy steel door at the end of the eastern corridor, the hinges groaning like a wounded animal. For the first time since I started this exploration, a thread of hope surged through me. Patient records were one thing, but staff files, especially those that might implicate a doctor who'd operated in secret, could be where the real truth lived. If I could find any notes or correspondence about Garrison, the experiments, or the missing files, maybe I could finally piece together what had really happened here. The room was a mess. Cabinets were appended, some drawers yawned open as if someone had ransacked them long ago. Paper spilled across the floor, yellowed and brittle. I crouched down, careful not to crush anything too fragile, and began sifting through the strewn documents. Most were mundane payroll sheets, schedules, personnel reviews, but then I found something different, a manila folder labeled Garrison, Harold, Case Studies and Observations. My heart pounded as I carefully extracted the folder, the edges of the paper crumbling at my touch. Inside were handwritten notes, typed reports, and a handful of photographs. The writing was clinical but sporadically deranged observations about patient reactions to various treatments, some of which were not approved or even mentioned in any of the asylum's official protocols. One report detailed a series of injections administered to a patient identified only as Subject 14, noting severe behavioral changes and neurological degeneration. The language was cold, detached, but the implications were horrifying. Garrison had been experimenting on these patients, using drugs and procedures that were not only unauthorized but downright cruel. I flipped through more pages until I reached correspondence letters between Garrison and an unknown recipient, discussing progress and results, always careful to avoid explicit details. What caught my eye was a recurring phrase, "Ensure no prying eyes." The tone grew more anxious and urgent with each letter, hinting that Garrison was aware someone might be looking for the truth. A sudden noise made me freeze. A faint scraping, like shoes shuffling against concrete. I spun around, flashlight sweeping the hallway outside the door, but the corridor was empty, silent except for the distant drip of water echoing through the building. I told myself it was just my imagination, nerves playing tricks. But the echoing silence that followed felt hollow and heavy, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I tucked the folder carefully into my backpack and stepped back into the corridor. The beam of the flashlight caught movement, or what I thought was movement. A shadow flickered just beyond the broken glass of the nurse's station. Someone was watching. I stopped dead. The figure was gone by the time I adjusted my focus, but I'd seen enough. Whoever had been here wasn't just a caretaker of a derelict building. They were guarding secrets, and they knew I'd found something. I turned and headed down the hall, heart hammering, but the sense of being watched didn't fade. Every few steps, I glanced over my shoulder, but there was nothing, just peeling paint, broken tiles, and the stale air pressing in. Back near the main lobby, I ducked into a utility closet to catch my breath and check my phone. The battery was dead. No signal. It was useless here. I felt isolated in a way that was more than just physical. I was a trespasser in a place where someone else held the leash. As I slipped back out, I nearly collided with a man emerging from the opposite hallway, his expression unreadable under the brim of a worn baseball cap. He was dressed like a maintenance worker, dirty coveralls and scuffed boots, but there was something about the way he watched me too carefully, too deliberately. "Lost?" he asked, his voice low and even. I hesitated, just looking around. He smiled thinly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You shouldn't be here. This place isn't safe." I nodded, meeting his gaze. "I know." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "You're digging where you shouldn't. Some things are better left buried." There it was, the warning I'd been dreading but also expecting. I wanted to ask who he was, what he wanted, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just said, "I'm almost done." He studied me for a long moment before stepping aside, gesturing down the hallway. "This way out," he said. Reluctantly, I followed, every instinct screaming that I was being led somewhere, watched, trapped. We reached the exit, and the man nodded toward the broken padlock hanging loose on the heavy front doors. "Go!" before you get yourself into trouble no one can fix. I stepped outside into the cold night air, the door slamming shut behind me with a finality that echoed through the empty grounds. Once I was safe on the cracked pavement, I pulled a folder from my bag and sat on the curb, heart still racing. The evidence was real. Garrison's experiments had been hidden here, and someone had spent decades making sure no one uncovered them. But now I had proof. And whoever had been watching me wasn't going to let this go. I looked back at the asylum's dark silhouette against the starless sky and knew this was only the beginning. I wouldn't stop, not now, not ever. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it. Because some truths demand to be told, even if it means putting yourself in the crosshairs of those who want silence.